Today is August 8th, 2023. I'm Adrienne Falaise, and it is my honor to be interviewing Yvette Lee Bowser for the Interviews in Oral History of Television and the Writers Guild Foundation, and we are in Encino, California. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today, Yvette.
Thank you for having me.
So first question is, what was your name at birth?
I was born Yvette Denise Lee. My mother wanted to name me Felicity June. Thankfully, my father won that debate, so I was Yvette Denise Lee. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the University of Pennsylvania in 1965.
And what were your parents' names?
My father's name was James. My mother's name was Carol. My dad was a gambler. He did that professionally for as much as anyone can gamble as a profession and make a living doing it. And kind of that's the basis of a whole other series, that my dad was a professional gambler. And we were definitely in some very kind of harrowing and sketchy situations while I was growing up. My mother, on the other hand, was a professional worker and earner. She held down many, many jobs over the years. When she left Penn State, she worked as a cigarette girl in Atlantic City. She worked as a grocery clerk. She turned herself into a vice president of a bank. And then even in her semi-retired years, she worked as a pari-mutuel clerk at the racetrack. So she was very driven. Yeah. And I get my drive from my mom, for sure. I get my sense of hustle from my dad, kind of that undying desire to complete whatever I start. That kind of comes from him.
And did you grow up in Philadelphia?
Actually, I was only there from 1965 to 1970. And in 1970, my parents and I took a cross-country trip to California. And as the story goes, I sang Do You Know the Way to San Jose the whole way there, even though we were headed nowhere near San Jose. We were headed to Los Angeles. And we got in my dad's Cadillac. My dad kept a Caddy. He had to. I mean, he was a gambler, so you got to have a Cadillac. And we landed in Los Angeles in 1970. And probably from the ages of 4 to 10, I probably lived in 10 different places in Los Angeles. So I lived all over. We were kind of transient in a way. So I finally landed in Santa Monica for 6th grade after my parents were divorced when I was 10. And my mom remarried my stepfather.
And what were some of your interests when you were little?
Reading, writing, entertaining myself. I think also I was a bit of a tomboy, so I was adventurous in that regard. Also, my dad liked to kind of challenge me to foot races, so that kind of led to my being kind of competitive. But I was also very creative. Like if you gave me a cardboard box, that was going to be a roller coaster down some very steep staircase. Like, I probably shouldn't be alive at this point. I also used to, jump off a carport with an umbrella, thinking I was Mary Poppins. So things like that. I kept myself pretty entertained. I am my parents' only child. They conceived children before and after me, but I'm the sole survivor. And I think that's part of who I am to this day, a survivor. I do have half-siblings from my father's first marriage to his high school sweetheart, 2 sisters and 2 brothers. They never really lived with me for any extended period of time as children, although I did have a period of time when my brothers stayed with us maybe for a year or so, and they tortured me quite a bit. So I kind of got toughened up during those years, learned how to fight. Very valuable skill. Later in life, it would come in handy in elementary school and junior high when people picked on me a lot for being a book nerd. And I got to know one of my half-sisters really well when she came to live with me as grown-ups, which actually informed one of the series that I shepherded onto the air. So we'll talk about that a little later, for sure.
What kind of writing did you like to do as a kid?
All kinds. I was kind of that weird kid who, for show and tell, would show up with Raggedy Ann and Andy puppets and some animal puppets. I had a bear, I had a rabbit. Other kids would bring toys for show and tell. I would write a 3-act play. And people thought I was weird, but they were entertained. And so that was all the affirmation I needed to keep doing it. And then also, as I mentioned, when I moved to Santa Monica in the 6th grade, I had this amazing teacher, Miss Timbrink, who encouraged me to pursue my creative writing talents and to really kind of lean into that. And that led to me wanting to be a journalist in high school, and had a great journalism professor in high school. And I think that those things really kind of encouraged me to continue being creative. Although when I went to college, I was definitely supposedly on my way to law school. And becoming a comedy writer was definitely a sidetrack from that.
What about television and movies? Did you watch a lot of television growing up?
I was raised by television. I was a latchkey kid. So, like, Laverne and Shirley were my babysitters, for sure. I loved Maude. Like, Maude was my girl. Like, she was everything I wanted to be. Self-possessed, bold, vocal, a feminist. I just really leaned into those images that I saw on television for inspiration. And entertainment. I loved I Love Lucy. I watched Happy Days, Partridge Family, Brady Bunch. So I was definitely seeing a lot of like friends as family images coming up, and I wanted that. Like Laverne and Shirley were like the OG, best friends. They were like kind of my beacons for sisterhood. I wanted to have adult friends like that when I grew up. Because they were super close. They were there for each other through thick and thin. So they very much kind of informed what I was looking to emulate later on in my life and in television, in my storytelling.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Stanford University.
And what did you study?
Poli-sci and psych. So, of course, I'm a comedy writer. But as I said, I was supposed to go to law school, but in the spring quarter of my senior year, I was headed to USC Law School, and I kind of derailed myself by having a little bit of a pity party with my best friend, Kimberly, and we were watching The Cosby Show, and for the first time, I recognized the name of someone that I knew in the credits, and I'd been watching the show for years and never noticed anyone's name, but for whatever reason, on that night, that name popped out at me, and it was the name of someone that I'd known in one of my many places that I lived throughout Los Angeles, and so I tracked him down, and I thought I was going to have to remind him who I was, but he remembered. His children and I were pretty close when we were living in the same apartment building in Hollywood, and I told him that I was supposed to be going to law school, but I had this creative energy that I thought needed to be tapped, and I wanted to know if there was anything he could tell me or anyone he could introduce me to that might kind of illuminate a path in television, because I felt like that's what was calling me at the time. And it just so happens that I was at Stanford University in the Bay Area in California, and his friend, Bill Cosby, was shooting a movie in Oakland just across the bay. So I got introduced to Dr. Cosby, and I told him that I had this creative energy that has to be tapped. And he said, "There's nothing for you out here. Go to law school." And I said, "No, but you have to read these."
It goes to show you sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. Tell me, do you agree with that?
Creative stories like this is there aren't even any creative writing classes at school, but I've been writing. It's like I'm writing like I'm running out of time, and like Hamilton, and it just came out of my mouth that way, so I'm just going to run with it. And he then kind of acquiesced and said, "Okay, I'll set you up on the spinoff of my show that's going to be shooting in Los Angeles, but I'm going to set you up as an apprentice writer, and the pay is $0.
Wow.
Make of what you will of it."
Yeah.
So I took that gamble. Of course, when I told my mom that I wanted to, take my Stanford degree and go become a comedy writer, she thought that was the funniest thing she'd ever heard, because she certainly, incurred some debt, and, I had some scholarship money, some grant money, and I worked throughout college to pay for it. And but she gave me a year to make something of it. And I think that's where that kind of hustle from my dad came from. Like, I was very, very determined. I was not going to fail.
So did you join the show then before it even started, right when it was ramping up?
I joined the show on August 4th, 1987. So I just had my 36th anniversary.
Wow.
4 days ago. Absolutely, yes. And the show, they'd shot a couple of episodes, but they were not intending to air those episodes. And the show was like, I was supposed to start earlier than August, but there was some retooling going on. And it's not really, a secret that the show was very much finding itself. There wasn't a creator involved in the show day to day. Those who had been credited with creating the show and had written the original pilot were either no longer working on The Cosby Show or still working on The Cosby Show, but they didn't have anything really to do with the series. So there was a group of us who were left there to then kind of fill that creative chasm. And collaboratively, we were able to develop and create what that show became over the first few seasons.
Do you recall what your very first impressions were, just kind of arriving there to the writer's room, to the first time you were on set? What was all that like?
Oof. It was pretty wild and wonderful in those initial days. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, like, I'm not making any money. And I was sitting in a room at times with people who didn't actually strike me as creative or all that interested in the process. And in that particular show, there were a couple of writers who were definitely there and dedicated and about the show, and that would be Thad Mumford and Susan Fales, and even Cheryl Gard, I would say. You remind me a bit of her, actually. She was lovely. It was really kind of overwhelming. I think in the initial weeks, I was wondering if I'd made the right decision. But then as the months wore on and I started to kind of suggest ideas for characters.
Taking a risk like that in your life.
And storylines that were actually getting used in the show, I started to feel like I was going to get a foothold on this thing, that there was really some traction. But one of the really beautiful things about being an unpaid apprentice was that I didn't have any defined responsibility. So there were times when I was able to kind of float throughout the production, soaking up whatever it was I wanted to or needed to soak up. Like I kind of created my own master's program. So, I found a way to take this thing that felt like maybe I'd made the wrong decision and give it some shape and give myself kind of a plan, kind of blaze a little trail of my own to get from here to there over the next, 5 years or so. Let me see, what else can I say? So yeah, I was like getting, I was taking lunch orders. I was making posters for Whitley, running for dorm monitor. I was pitching story ideas, character ideas. We used a lot of stories and characters from my college experience on that show because I was fresh out of college and the show was about young people in college. Although I think the problem with season one was that because of the leadership season one, we were really writing a high school show. And so there was a small contingent of us in the room who knew that tonally we were going to need to make a shift at some point. Although, we were charged with making the very best show and telling the very best stories we could, under the leadership, with the showrunner we had the first season. But we definitely were kind of conjuring up a plan to shift things in season two, which we did very effectively.
What was that like, kind of pitching your own ideas for the first time in a writer's room?
It was kind of scary pitching my own ideas in the writer's room for the first time, but I also didn't have anything to lose, so I just summoned my inner Maud. It's like, what can they do? Not pay me? They were already not paying me, right? And at some point, actually, after several character ideas and story ideas that I'd pitched were used and actually in episodes that aired, I went and petitioned to get a salary, and it was determined that I had earned it. So I got like a PA salary, and I did the math that year because based on the number of hours we worked in the writer's room, which was sometimes 20-hour days, and I'm not joking, I made 94 cents an hour that first season. So I paid my dues.
Indeed.
I've done my time. But it was worth it. It was really worth it because, like I said, I was kind of paving a path to my ultimate goal, which was to be on staff and then ultimately to become, a valued producer on the number 2 show on television, and that was quite a feeling to know that I had been part of that process of kind of filling that creative chasm and that there was this core group of us that actually developed and created what that show became. So when I left there after 5 seasons, I kind of felt like I can do that. I can do that.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I had all the tools to make that happen at some point. I didn't know it would happen as quickly as it did, but because of other situations that we can talk about, that plan got accelerated.
So when did you become an official writer on staff?
I became an official writer on staff of A Different World, season 2.
Season 2.
And at that point, I had already rewritten/written several episodes uncredited. You know, like sometimes a freelance writer would write an episode that we had broken in the room, and it would come in not such great shape, and I would be asked to take another pass at it before we as a group tabled that. So I wrote those scripts.
And did the format come easily to you? Did you shadow anyone to learn how to do it?
The format was pretty easy. It was pretty simple. And, you know, quite frankly, we were telling really simple stories. They weren't complicated or deep. And the goal that season was really kind of finding the funny in some characters that weren't inherently funny, nor was there kind of built-in conflict that you actually do need for quality storytelling. So we were, I mean, it was, the bar wasn't as high as it needed to be, but which was something that I learned. Like, we really were kind of creating the quality. We were building the plane as we were flying it.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty well documented. So I'm not speaking out of school on that.
Yeah. So let's talk about that transition from season 1 to season 2. There were a lot of cast changes then. Debbie Allen came in as a producer-director. What was that transition period like?
That was really exciting, you know, and as I mentioned, Thad and Susan and I already knew that we had been kind of fighting a losing battle tonally during season 1, and so we'd already planned and had gone on a tour, the three of us, of HBCUs, where we were just gathering all this really rich material, you know, to kind of weave into the fabric of the show. And at the end of that tour, we ended up at Dr. Cosby's house, where we were introduced to Debbie, who was going to be coming on as a producer-director. So the plan was in motion, and having her come in and have the experience of actually having gone to Howard University, which is an HBCU, and also her helping us kind of mend the relationship between the page and the stage, the writers and the actors. It really created more of a familial and collegiate environment, which is completely appropriate given what the show was about. And also it demonstrated how we could work as a family in a work environment. And I really dug that. It was really exciting. It was really great to be there at that period of time, to have stuck it out through what was very challenging creatively, season 1, where we were really making the best of not such a great situation. Because there were definitely camps season 1. Season 2 was like, we're all going to come together and we're going to move in the same direction. And there certainly were some bumps in the road, but for the most part, we were all on the same page.
Did the cast have input in the storylines as well?
Over time, they did. I mean, I think that was something that was really important to Debbie, for them to contribute in that way. And I think we found it valuable as writers, too. It was also, you know, an opportunity for me to learn how you could really lean into the strengths of the actors and kind of give more layers to the characters that you're working with. And then we also started leaning into the natural chemistry that we saw happening in front of us, you know. We knew there was some potential between Whitley and Dwayne in season 1. I was really excited about that. And the evolution of that relationship, and that became kind of the center of the show. Yeah. But you could see it. I mean, there was something really interesting happening between those two actors. Not that they had like off-screen chemistry in any way. I'm not suggesting that at all. But those two characters were in many ways, you know, star-crossed lovers. Yeah. They were primed, and also they were informed by certain people who were involved in the process the first season. It was It was a really interesting process, because there were times when we were borrowing attributes of each other's in the room, and certain people didn't realize that they were being pilfered, that their personalities were informing these characters in certain moments. But it was very fun. It was very organic, which also let me know how my life and the lives of the real humans in my orbit could inform great characters that people want to watch, that people get really passionate about and invested in over the course of time, and want to see, how their lives pan out.
Yeah. So what was that season 2 writers' room like? How were there writing partners that got assigned? Did people get assigned episodes? Did you break the arc right at the beginning? Like, how did it go down?
Season 2 was, I believe there were only 4 of us that remained from season 1 to season 2. I could be mistaken, but I'm certain, in my memory, it was myself, Susan Vales, now Hill, and Thad Mumford and Cheryl Gard were the only ones who remained from season 1 to season 2. And that was necessary because just the other people who were there just weren't dedicated to what the show was about, and I think you do have to be all in on whatever show it is, whether you've created it or not. You have to buy into that premise, buy into those characters, love them. If you don't understand them, it's hard to love them, it's hard to hear them, it's hard to write them if you can't hear them and feel them. So there was an overhaul of the staff that season. And there were some changes as the seasons went on, seasons 2 through 6. I was only there till season 5 myself, but we were always looking to bring in just new voices, divergent voices, because we knew that would layer the conversation in the room and therefore layer the show. It would be more resonant, with a wider audience. And it worked out pretty well. It worked out really well. I mean, we had a lot of really smart, really funny writers. We brought in playwrights. We had a couple, people who had never written before, people who'd come from film school. My OG mentee, Gina Prince Bythewood, came in. I took her under my wing. That was cool to kind of mentor someone who was where I was only, 4 years earlier.
Yeah.
Was really rewarding and fun.
The show often covered some serious topics like sexual assault and discrimination. Can you talk a little bit about balancing that tone between, serious subject matter within the context of a comedy?
It was really easy because we were on a college campus. So it's that time of life where you're going through finding out who you are. You're going through existential crises. You're raising your socio-political consciousness. So all those stories were really organic. You're having sex for the first time, and we were also kind of experiencing the HIV epidemic. So it was natural that our characters on this college campus, encounter that. That episode that we did, If I Should Die Before I Wake, was one that I'm particularly proud of. Susan wrote that script, but we all contributed to it because we could feel it, in our bones. It was devastating the community, and it wasn't just one segment of the community. It was the whole community was being hit by this epidemic. So that was a particularly easy idea to execute. In terms of standards and practices and network reaction, there was definitely some pushback. Oh my gosh, my alarm on my phone is going off.
It's okay.
I don't know where I'm supposed to be right now.
Can you get to it, Carrie?
But I'm in an interview.
What were the conversations in the writer's room like about that episode?
The conversations in the writer's room were particularly passionate. There were lots of strong points of view, as you would imagine, and about how to get into the story and service the message, if you will. And I feel like it was particularly tense around who the person who had HIV was. Should it be, a male, a female? Should it be gay, straight? And I recall Susan and I feeling very, very strongly about it being a heteronormative female. And I stand by that. I think it was important to have it be a black woman so that people could not like tune out and just say, that's not me. I think it just made it feel more broadly inclusive. Like this can touch anyone and everyone. So we all need to be concerned about it. And we need to not put people in their different corners or quadrants. I think that was really, really important. So we won that battle.
Yeah. Tisha Campbell played the character
very brilliantly.
Whoopi Goldberg guest starred in that episode.
Yes, she did. And that brought a lot of attention to it, even though I believe advertisers pulled out, and we actually ended up airing it without advertising. But it was a really wonderful episode, which I believe we received a Humanitas for. I'm really proud of that work. I mean, it was on that show that I really embraced the idea that my art could be part of my activism, and I've carried that responsibility and torch with me throughout my career.
Yeah. Let's talk about a few other specific episodes. You wrote part 1 of the 2-part episode featuring Dwayne and Whitley's wedding.
Yes.
So you talked a little bit about setting the scene for their relationship
Sure.
early on. So talk about kind of the culmination.
Yeah. Save the best for last, which I entitled Save the Best for Last because I knew I was leaving. So it was a little wink to myself. Because at that point, it had been incredibly rewarding, like I said, to be part of this consortium of creatives who kind of came together as a group and created this show. It was kind of a show without a mommy, and we kind of became collectively its surrogate creative mommies. And watching those two characters in particular evolve from kind of, the goofy guy who was hitting on everybody, and offering hoagies in his flip-up glasses, and watching him evolve into kind of this, kind of more self-possessed, mature young man, and also to win the hand of this once very immature dilettante who is now a slightly more mature dilettante. Was really, really fun. For them to go, from friends to lovers is one of my favorite, it's kind of one of my favorite journeys, which, obviously I took with several pairings over the course of my career. But to get to write that episode and include a few scenes in particular that were really pages from my diary was really a rewarding way to leave the show, because I had been ripping pages from my diary to lend to the show for the last 5 years. So to take something that was particularly poignant and personal to me, and write the scene where Dwayne goes to Whitley the night before the wedding, and they each say to each other that they taught each other how to love, that they actually taught each other how to grow.
With you, that is one of my favorite episodes. Let me know in the comments, what was your favorite episode of A Different World?
It was a really special way to kind of, leave my mark on the show.
Absolutely.
And leave a piece of myself. I left a lot of pieces of myself, but that was, for me, kind of a crowning moment.
Why did you decide to leave the show?
It was time. It was really just time for me to leave the show. I'd grown up there. I'd really told all the stories I felt I had in me to tell through Whitley, Dwayne et al. And I'd been seen in my diapers, and I didn't feel, so to speak. And I felt like I wasn't really going to be able to fly as high as I could if I stayed in that exact same environment, because even though I had risen from apprentice to full-fledged producer, there was still a little stigma there that I was the baby. It's like we actually in the writer's room, we had this fictitious family that we would lean into every now and then. We'd go into these characters. They were the Bunt family, and I was Baby Bunt. So I was always the baby. And Thad actually, he would call me LYT, because I also was incredibly, brutally truthful about how I felt about characters and story, and he would call me LYT, Little Yellow Truth, speaking to, that I was the baby, and I'm fair-skinned, and that I most often told the truth. So I felt like it was just time to go and figure out who I was in the world outside of that kind of cozy environment where I'd grown up. It was kind of like I felt like I had graduated. It was time. I had my master's, and it was time to go get my PhD elsewhere.
Yeah. Before we move on from the show, I wanted to talk about, we mentioned Whoopi Goldberg, Diane Carroll played Whitley's mother, Patti LaBelle played Dwayne's mother. Talk about working with some of the guest stars on the show.
That was really, really cool to get to meet these icons and to also see how accessible they were and how professional they were. And so all the stories that you hear about, stars behaving badly, to see that these incredibly, uniquely talented people could be so professional and so warm was something that I came to expect and sometimes demand from talent in the future when working with people, whether I was, part of the casting process or not. Like, I would try to look into their soul and see what is this person going to be like 5-10 episodes in, and you don't always get it right. I got it wrong a few times, but I did feel like I kind of honed that skill because I was exposed to those people who didn't need to be there but wanted to be there. And so it helped me kind of hone that skill of kind of assessing whether or not people want to be there. Because when you're creating a series in particular, it's so different from doing a movie where you're going to be with someone for some months, maybe a year or so. But this is something that you want to do for years on end. So you really want to pick your partners wisely. And so if you can get that sense from them at the beginning, it makes the path a lot easier and more pleasant. And like I said, working with those huge name stars, some of the brightest stars in our community, and seeing how professional and lovely they were and how willing they were to share their knowledge. And also, Diane Carroll in particular was very clear in telling us, you all have it really good. You know what I'm saying? There's this institutional knowledge that all of those people that you named have. It's Whoopi and Patty and Diane Carroll that we got the benefit of. You don't always get that. You could work a lifetime and not have access to that kind of genius and just magnificent essence.
You became a co-producer season 4 and then a producer season 5.
Yes.
So what did your role as a producer entail?
My role as a producer entailed quite a bit because, as I said from the very beginning, my role was undefined. And so I was able to float into different departments. I was able to go down on stage and watch the acting process and see what the gaffers were doing and what the costumers were doing and what the director was doing. And then I would go into editing and learn how that process was really kind of like the last part, the final rewrite. So I had quite a bit of skill that went beyond just the writing. So I was really a very experienced producer by the time I received that title. In fact, my original deal had expired, and so I made a leap from story editor to co-producer and then producer pretty quickly because I had really been working at that level because I'd done the training. And I had all that, wealth of knowledge about how to cut the show and what to look for in performances and how to, be very facile at, coming up with jokes and fixes, for scenes. So I was contributing at a really high level and co-managing the show. So I was producing it.
Were you looking towards creating your own show at that point? Was that the goal?
I was eventually looking to run my own show. I did not have a sense at the time that I left of how soon that would come. But circumstances at my subsequent job led me to put a fire under my behind and really dig in on creating my own show because I really wanted to create my own work environment. So I left A Different World and I landed on Hanging with Mr. Cooper, which was a lot less female and minority-friendly environment. to say the least. I mean, I can tell you lots of details if you want, or I can tell you some.
We will get into it. Before we go there, I want to
Yes.
ask one last question.
Sure,
about
you can
different
ask a
world.
bunch of questions about a different world. I was there for a long time.
We
so
could be there for hours talking about it. I want to know.
it's my first love.
Yeah. As a producer, how much involvement did you have with the executive producers like Marcy Carson and Tom Werner? Were they available like when you had questions, or did you have to go to them with questions? What was the interaction like with the EPs?
Marcy and Tom were there when we needed them. They were there to advocate for us. They were there to give us, quality feedback on ideas and episodes. They're brilliant, brilliant executives. I mean, they just don't make them like that anymore. They just don't make them like that anymore. And Marcy Carsey said something to me that I use to this day in the showrunners training program. She told me, delegate or die. Like, television does not get made by one person. It is a group effort. And to try to do everything yourself is to kill yourself. You really do need to delegate or die. It was like some of the best advice I ever got. And it also speaks to like knowing what your limitations are, knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, playing to your strengths, and engaging other people to kind of fill in where you can't be or where you're less skilled. She really, really helped me define who I am as a manager and showrunner.
Yeah. Okay, last question about
They
A
were
Different
great.
World.
They were great.
What do you think the legacy of A Different World is?
We changed the world. We changed the world with that show. We shifted the culture. I mean, applications to HBCUs went up exponentially after the first couple seasons of the show. It became the place to be, not only for the viewership, but for people in the real world. It meant something. It still does. It still does. Like, people still watch the show. They buy all kinds of bootleg paraphernalia because for whatever reason, the company did not exploit, Hillman, the university. But people send me all kinds of Hillman gear. God bless you, all the time. And I love it. I wear it with pride. I got my master's there. I got my PhD on living single. I got my master's at Hillman on A Different World. And I think it's just there's lots of wonderfully entertaining shows that had huge audiences for a period of time that people have long since forgotten. But that is a show that will live on for the culture.
All right, let's talk about that road to the PhD then. So the next stop was hanging with Mr. Cooper.
Yes, which was a lovely opportunity to work with my high school girlfriend, Holly Robinson Peete.
Yes.
But it was short-lived. Going back to just the composition of the writer's room, the room was filled with a lot of people who didn't know anything about the people or the place the show pretended to be about. And that created very easy conflict in the room. I am not a person who comes kind of charging in being an expert, but you know what you know. And also at that point, I had been a valuable contributing member of the number 2 show on television. So I didn't necessarily expect that all of my ideas would be utilized, but I didn't expect everything I said to be rejected. I also was the only woman and the only Black person in the room when the room opened. And I found that to be egregious. But I didn't carry it outwardly. I took it home. I tamped it down. It was very, very frustrating to be that lone voice and to experience so much pushback, and then also to have people who had no sense of their own microaggressions. I dealt with a lot of racism, not necessarily conscious, but and misogyny. And I was just like, wow, I just got smacked in the face with what Hollywood really looks like. I was really I was in a black ivory tower at Carsey Werner. It was very female friendly, very, minority friendly environment. And this was clearly what the rest of Hollywood looked like, or the majority of Hollywood. And I also was just not one to suffer fools. And so I doubled down on my desire to create my own show so that I could create my own work environment where people like me who were minority and marginalized could feel comfortable and safe saying anything at any point in time. You know, I'm sure you've spoken to a lot of writers who say, like, the writer's room is, you know, sacrosanct and you should be able to say anything in it. And it's interesting because I think a lot of writers that you've talked to are probably feeling like, oh, we should be able to, you know, talk this way or that way, even if we have a writer's assistant who's a woman who might be rubbed the wrong way by this comment or that comment. And I just literally didn't even feel like I could be myself in that room. And I had just contributed greatly to, you know, a hit show by being myself. So now it was made to feel like myself was not worthy, was not enough, was not valued. And that was not going to last. That was not going to stand. I was going to go back to law school. I was going to become a banker. I was going to do anything but put up with that. So I kind of reiterated to my agent that I was really interested in pursuing development opportunities. And God answered the call. And before I went to hang with Mr. Cooper, I actually had taken some general development meetings. And one of the people that I met with was David Gentilari, who was the head of comedy development at Warner Brothers. And that was also one of the reasons why I ended up at Hang with Mr. Cooper, because he kind of wanted me in the Warner Brothers family. It was actually Laura Marr became Warner Brothers, but that's not that critical to the story. But so I was there, you know, under their umbrella when Fox Network and Warner Brothers Studio made a talent holding deal with Queen Latifah and Kim Coles to develop a show. And both of them had failed pilots in the past, written by non-Black writers. And so they had teamed up and were determined to...
In the comments, when you're writing for a predominantly Black TV show, or white, or any other heritage, do you think it makes a difference, the color of the writers?
Advocate for a Black writer to get an opportunity to write a show for them. And I was the beneficiary of their advocacy.
What was that original show idea for them?
They actually had just the germ of an idea. They kind of, because there were two of them, I think, they wanted to do a buddy comedy. And there wasn't much of an idea. It was really like, we want to do a buddy comedy. I think, and someone else may be able to correct the record for me, but I felt like there was some idea of one of them being a performer and the other one being their manager. But I just didn't know what was real or relatable about that. Not that that dynamic doesn't exist, but I couldn't feel immediately like where the stories were going to come from. And then also, quite frankly, you know, with one of them being a rapper who had done some acting and the other one being a comedian who had worked primarily on a sketch show, I wanted to create an ensemble around them to give them kind of the space and the time to really get their bearing as actors. You know, we had actors on A Different World who had, you know, come into that show with different levels of skill, and I felt like it was going to be a safer space for them to grow as performers, but also, you know, going back to my own personal agenda of depicting stories that feel organic and authentic to me, and also wanting to have kind of that sisterly energy and enviable female relationships like I saw on Laverne and Shirley and like I had in my own real life. I thought, I can write 100 episodes about me and my friends. And that's where the show idea came from. And I'd been kind of noodling on it in the background, but had put it aside because I was going to be the best, you know, producer on Hang with Mr. Cooper ever, until, you know, I started getting bludgeoned with my own dreams of contributing. So I created that show while I was on Hang with Mr. Cooper the first season.
Did you meet with the two of them to kind of...
Absolutely. They contributed greatly to their characters in particular. In fact, while the show is, you know, largely based on, you know, me and my friends, it took place in Brooklyn because they were both, Latifah in particular was definitely East Coast energy. I also love New York. And spent some time there, but not as much as the characters in the show. But I definitely met with them. I hung out with them. Kim Coles had all kinds of quirks, and she also had a different sense of what kind of character she wanted to play. But we had some really great, honest conversations that led to Sinclair, this very kind of simple and whimsical dreamer character. And also, Latifah, Dana, I hung out with her. I was like, okay, she's very Maud adjacent. And Khadijah is very much who I aspired to be, entrepreneur, want to have my own business. I gave those attributes to her, and she didn't actually like the name Khadijah at first. She was like, I love this pitch show. I love everything about it. I'm just not sure about that name. And I said, just let it marinate. Just let it marinate. And she did. And I think she's happy with it now. She actually recently told me that people have been coming up to her saying, oh my gosh, I loved your show, Living Single, and I named my daughter after you. She goes, oh, Dana? No, Khadijah. She was like, you were right, yo. That was the right name. It was the right name for that character, and people really still love it to this day. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty affirming. But they did definitely contribute. And just figuring out, who those two were forced me to figure out how to round out the energy in terms of the storytelling, finding, different people, different personalities that would offer different points of view. And Max is very much my alter ego. Max is who I was just before I met my husband, who was my boyfriend, who's named Kyle, who's now my husband. And we're getting ready to celebrate our 30th anniversary of our engagement later this month. Yeah. So I am Max. But Max, of course, was, brought to life and brilliantly played by Erica Alexander. That's what a blessing. What a blessing. I mean, we can talk about the casting of that. And also, I reached out to Kim Fields. She was friends with another actor friend of mine, and so we had met years earlier on A Different World. And she wanted to develop a show for herself, and I said, I think I have a role for you. I think you, with your experience, will be the perfect piece, of this puzzle, to fill out this puzzle that I'm putting together, these characters. And again, someone who's a seasoned actress, so that our two less experienced actors didn't have to carry the show. And then, of course, it was really important for me that the show be female-centered. But I think when you have something that's got those four strong females, you have to have that male energy to balance it. Enter the guys. And that's how we ended up with, an ensemble of 6. And Kyle and Overton were loosely based on the real Kyle and the real Overton, just in terms of energy. And maybe a wardrobe, too. And maybe a couple points of view. I shouldn't say too much. Although they both have varsity jackets that say the real Kyle, the real Overton.
That's great.
And the real Overton has definitely used that to his advantage over the years.
When you came up with your idea, did you have to go back to Warner Brothers and pitch again, or how did kind of it all get developed?
Absolutely. I mean, once I had the idea fully formed and I had this tome of information about the characters and their backstories and where the show could go, I went and pitched it to the executives at Warner Brothers along with Latifah and Kim Coles, and they loved it. And then we took it to Fox, and they also loved it. And I will say, Suzanne Daniels, who was at Fox, I think she kind of got it right away, thanks to the existence of Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale. That kind of helped them see how, this group of women could center a show and the value of having that male energy balance it out. So that's how we came up with the show.
And were those your first experiences pitching?
That was my first
What
pitch.
was that like
Which
for
is
you?
wild, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do this pilot. I'm going to give it the old college try, and we'll see how it turns out. There was, of course, always, as there always is, a plot twist. I pitched the premise, and everybody bought in. And I pitched the pilot story, and everybody bought in. And then I wrote the pilot script, and everyone at the studio loved the script. And then we turned it into the network, and they loved the script. But they had a couple notes, and they weren't all small. One was that they wanted a new plot because they felt it was too much. They didn't like the fact that it had too much of a premise, like Sinclair was moving from Minneapolis was part of that original pilot, if I recall. And for some executives at the network, the character of Maxine Shaw was a little intimidating on paper. So that was a tougher note. And I was young enough, naive enough, and bold enough to take Max out of the show is to take a big part of me out of the show, and I'd rather not do the show at all. So they let me figure out a workaround, and the workaround was basically for me to have Maxine Shaw, who was an attorney and could afford her own apartment, live across the street and come over all the time and get more comedy from the fact that she was always there helping herself to their food, their closets, their ex-boyfriends, whatever it was. Max was just, she just became like bolder and funnier as far as I'm concerned. So it was a good compromise for them, a good creative exercise for me. I also had, I basically doubled down on my determination to get it done. And I was also only given 2 weeks to rewrite that pilot to still be in contention for the pilot season. So at some point, I stayed up for like 3 days straight, and my cousin, one of my inspirations for Sinclair, who was living with me, came to me and said, "You are brain dead right now. You are physiologically brain dead. You need to go to sleep." And my boyfriend at the time, Kyle, came and said, "We're laying you down, sweetie." And they put me down in the bed and put on Tchaikovsky, and took a nice nap. And when I woke up, I got back to it, and I met my deadline, and the show got picked up.
And was it determined from the beginning that you were going to be the showrunner?
It was not determined from the beginning that I was going to be the showrunner, but I'm going to back up. I'm going to do a boop, boop, boop.
Please.
While I was rewriting that pilot for 2 weeks, unbeknownst to me, some of the white male writers on Hang with Mr. Cooper were uncomfortable with the fact that I took 2 weeks off from the show to write this pilot for the studio that we were all working at. And when I came back to work, I noticed that their job titles had changed, and I saw this on the backs of their director's chairs on set. So where we were all doing the same job at the beginning of the season, I stepped away for 2 weeks, and I came back to discover they'd been promoted. Because apparently my absence was so taxing on them that they needed to be elevated. So there was no way I wasn't going to get this show made. There was no way. And I was, again, going to create an environment where no one felt so poorly treated and devalued in a blatant way. It was really kind of remarkable. But it also taught me how resilient one can be.
And you formed your own production company.
Absolutely.
Was it at the same time or right before?
It was at the same time. It was at the same time. It was honestly, it was like kind of putting the energy out there. Like, I'm going to need this S Corp. And eventually this S Corp is going to stand for something. It's actually going to be a brand. I'm from the city of brotherly love. I am a sister. My last name was Lee, so Sister Lee Productions. And sisterly behavior, embracing other women is just a part of who I am. So it all seemed right. Came up with my production card, and there are all kinds of culture cues there. There's kente cloth, there's my initials, and then there's a little version of me, and that's really me, hanging onto a windmill in a bright pink suit. And there's Don Quixote jousting at those windmills, basically showing the passionate pursuit of the impractical, which is really what it's all about.
Absolutely. So then Living Single was the first show from your production company?
It was the first show from my production company. It was the first show that I attempted to create from my own little head.
Getting paid 94 cents an hour to do your passion. Most people will look at it as shocking or crazy, but I look at it as beautiful. I too am a writer. And if you're interested in becoming a writer, look in the description box below and you'll be able to see my course on writing as well as my book.
All right, so let's back up for a minute and talk about casting Living Single. What was that process like?
I loved it so much. And I think since I came up as an apprentice in this business, I kind of maintained that mentality at every stage. So when I got the opportunity to cast my first show, I went to the casting director and said, I want to sit in on the pre-reads because I want to learn what this process really looks and feels like. I want to know how you tell the difference between someone who's got it and someone who doesn't, who has that it factor, someone who's not polished, how you might polish that diamond in the rough into someone who can be a star of a show. So I went to Geraldine Leader and asked her if I could sit in, and I sat in on all the pre-reads. So I saw everyone. And when you do that, you learn a lot very, very quickly. Not only about the actors and the casting process and their acting process, you also learn about your words when you hear them over and over and over again. So that really worked to my advantage because I was polishing that script. Knowing that we were going to shoot it, it was getting polished through that casting process. So I thank the many actors that we did not cast for helping me hear the material over and over again to see what was really working and what wasn't. But also, I got to hone my gut, and I feel like we did a really good job casting this show and knowing what chemistry really was and wasn't, which was also something I had begun to hone on A Different World. We discovered a lot of really great talent on that show, and I was part of that process as well. But again, from the ground up, my own show, my own vision, kind of gut checking my own voice. I literally thought Leela Rashawn was going to be Max. But when Erica Alexander came in, it was over. She was it. She was it. And she was surprised because Erica, God bless her, does not realize how hilarious and just really grounded her performances can be. I mean, she's just brilliant. She's just really brilliant. They all made me look good. They all made me look good. And John Henton, for example, I'd seen him in a showcase, in a comedy showcase, and I just really liked his energy. And when he came in and started talking about Jessa Hammer, I was like, oh, like your heart just melts. Like he believed it. He believed every word he was saying. He felt it, and you felt it. You know, and T.C. Carson submitted a tape. He was in Chicago. He submitted a tape. I believe I still have that tape, that audition tape. But when I saw them, I knew who they were. I was, you know, and I had been over the course of a couple of months, kind of seeing who wasn't working. So you knew it when it walked in the room, or when it came to you via VCR and VHS. You just knew it. You just knew it. They really like owned those roles, every single one of them. And we did take in other actors, for the network to approve, but we knew who our first choices were. So I got my first choice. And they didn't disappoint. And throughout the series, I remain grateful that they trusted this first-time show creator, with their lives for 5 seasons, with their time, with their faces that were going out into the world representing these characters. I have such tremendous respect for actors in general and this cast in particular. We grew up together, and that was something that I also had at A Different World. I was very, close in age to those actors as well. So we were a family. So I needed that again. I needed it to be a show and a family, to give it as much time as it required to make it a hit and to make it something special. And it's something I didn't have on my second job. It was just not there. And I was just like, I craved that. And just, again, being an only child who wanted siblings, like I, gravitate toward, groups and chosen family dynamics. Like that's That's just who I am, and that's what I enjoy. And when you spend as much time as we spend, ideating and writing and executing and editing and, post-production on these ideas, like they become so much a part of your life, you want to love it. You want to love it, and you want to love as many people involved as possible. You can't do it with everybody, but you want to love as many facets of it as possible when you give it that kind of time.
Did you know from the beginning the romances that you wanted to develop? So did you do specific chemistry reads with Maxine and Kyle?
Didn't need him. Didn't need those chemistry reads. I just knew it was there. We did not do those chemistry reads because nobody's job was hinging on that working. I definitely had planted those relationships. There were two different kinds of relationships. The Sinclair and Overton relationship and the Max and Kyle relationship were very different kinds of relationships that were budding from the pilot. From, page one, they were there, intended. Those were not accidental relationships. And I did know also, just because I do enjoy a happy ending, I did know that I would at some point develop meaningful love interests for Kim Field's character Regine and Latifah's character Khadijah. I knew that those were, to come because I had this much paper. But that was also wonderful. Just putting that much effort into their backstory was so helpful in fleshing out stories going forward because we knew so much about where they had come from. And that was also one of the semi-unique things about the show, that it wasn't just an ensemble. It was, an ensemble of 20-somethings who also weren't just chosen family. Some of them were family members with each other, Sinclair and Khadijah, and they'd known each other from childhood and other formative experiences. Like Khadijah and Regine knew each other from when they were babies, and Max and Khadijah knew each other from college. Like that was her best friend, her chosen best friend, and Regine was the best friend that her mother decided she was going to have, but she could see all of the redeeming qualities, and they helped each other grow. They challenged each other in ways that people who've known you since you were in your diapers can challenge you, and that's a good thing. It's a really good thing, and I think that history made the show special, and the fact that it was about this group of kind of wide-eyed singles in the city, learning how to live and love together, for the first time on their own, made it a really special premise.
What are your memories of shooting the pilot?
So much fun. So exciting. I mean, how can you not be excited? These are characters that existed in my head, 7 months ago. And now they're being played by this brilliant cast of people who are nailing every line, every joke, owning each of their roles. The audience is loving it. From the table read, it was gangbusters, as we say. The table read was gangbusters, and yet I got a note from the network that it needed to be 10% funnier, and I was like, I don't even know. I don't do numbers. I'm a wordsmith. I write. Don't know what you mean, but okay. We'll add some jokes here and there. And, there were lots of notes that took things in slightly different directions than were intended, but they were okay. I knew the notes I could take. I knew the notes that I could make my own, and I knew the notes that I had to say no to. For example, get rid of Maxine Shaw. No way, no how. She needs to be part of this ensemble. Every character was important. There were no superfluous characters. There was no character that we were kind of just planting in there to discover on the fly. I will say that, like real people, the characters all evolved, and that was very intentional. And I do think, we received some criticism at the beginning of the series. Some people didn't feel like, maybe the comedy or the characters were as evolved as they wanted them to be, but that's too bad. The audience got it, and they embraced it, and they still do. Again, what a blessing to create something in my little room by myself that people are still watching and loving and being motivated and inspired by 30 years later.
How do you think?
I'm not going to cry.
Tears are
But I am
allowed.
moved. No, I am moved by how passionate people are about the show. I mean, like, just the fan art and the TikToks and the, campaigns to reboot the show. It's really, really overwhelming in the best way. It really is, because
Comments, would you love to see a living single reboot?
it is an authentic depiction of me and my friends and the people that I hold dear. So for society at large to embrace that, it's meaningful. It's really meaningful.
Absolutely. You did shoot in front of a live studio audience as well, so you got to see reactions in real time.
Absolutely.
What did that add to the program?
Well, that's just the beauty of multicam, really. I mean, I don't know what people did kind of just coming out of the pandemic and they were still shooting multicams, but they were shooting them without an audience. There's something very rewarding and just electric about that live audience immediate feedback, and also like just honing your skills when a joke or line doesn't work and just coming up with a new one on the spot. Like, I loved continuing to sharpen those skills. Now, I've been in single camera for a few years now, and I feel like in my real life, my husband's like, okay, enough with the jokes. Because I feel like that's the only place I have to like hone those on the spot skills. And that's just a part of, who I am. So I got to exercise that muscle. But I kind of miss it. But it was really, really fun to make so many episodes of television in front of a live audience. Like, there's just a real reciprocity that, it's kind of inexplicable how it makes you feel. But it's damn good. It's damn good. I miss it. I wish we were able to sell more multicams. I would definitely go back and try to execute another one, for sure. I miss that. We also, because we were only considered a pilot presentation, we shot our pilot on some augmented Family Matters sets because we had very little money. And, even though they seemed enthusiastic about it, they were kind of hedging their bets, not necessarily all in. And they did that for several shows. Interestingly, the ones I can recall are actually shows with black casts. So that's something that, is kind of a cross we've had to bear as part of this, our experience as black people in the television industry, including The Cosby Show. If you go back and watch the pilot of The Cosby Show, they did not shoot it on their regular sets. They shot it on some very kind of janky, basic sets that then became the fabulous Huxtable home in subsequent episodes. But they only had a 15-minute presentation, in fact, for that one. And I think ours was intended to be a 15-minute presentation, but we ended up shooting a full-length presentation in those augmented sets. And then we caught lightning in a bottle that night, so we didn't reshoot the pilot. Thank goodness. But they did such a great job in front of that audience. It was really nice to have those actors, whom I said just really bought into it, get that feedback from the audience, and not play to the audience, but just receive it. Receive that gift. Laughter is a gift. It's a gift. It's a gift, and it's healing. It's one of the reasons why, even though I've definitely done some dramedies, I live for comedy. It's just so healing. Some people go to therapy. I write comedy.
At what point did you become showrunner? Because you said you weren't attached at the beginning to become the showrunner.
At the beginning, yes. So I wrote the pilot, and I polished the pilot, and I cast the pilot. But somewhere in the midst of that green light process to shoot the pilot, Warner Brothers sat me down with a very nice man named Tom Anderson, who had, along with his partner, co-run Cheers the year before, and he was now on an overall deal at Warner Brothers. And because it is a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and I had not managed a show. I had only had a producer title, and they didn't know, what skills I really had. We had this arranged marriage. We were sat down, and the way it was put to me is like, a lot of money is on the line, and we'd like you to have this help. And Tom was like, I don't know anything about this show. I think your script is funny, and you seem to know what you're doing, so I'll do it. I mean, he was like just an angel, really. He's like there to be my guardian angel, and he didn't futz with it. He added some jokes, and we had a good time. And Tom, he had such great room bits. I won't do any of them for you here, but he had a lot of great, he brought a lot of great energy to the room once we got up and running. But he really, for the most part, just like gave me my lane, and provided protection for me, like a layer of protection against, notes that didn't make sense and that kind of thing.
Man, so what was your favorite Living Single episode?
And by the middle of the first season, it was very obvious to, the powers that be that I was running the show. And so by the middle of first season, I negotiated an executive producer title. I was the showrunner, and I also made my first overall deal at Warner Brothers. And the show was a hit. That helped. All of those things. I had demonstrated my ability to do everything that the job required to run the show. And Tom co-signed the fact that I was actually doing the work. He was happy to have me do the work, and I was happy to do it. So it was a perfect partnership in that regard, because it doesn't always work out that way. Oftentimes when people are, part of these arranged marriages, there'll be someone, who has the showrunner title, who comes in and they maybe have or haven't created a show, but they decide that they want their voice to take over. But Tom was really great about that. And I was really clear with him that I knew from intimate experience on a different world that whoever is in that showrunner seat has a tremendous amount of power over the tone and the shape and the look of the show. From seasons 1 to 2, it was night and day on a different world. So, we had a showrunner season 1 who had come off of a very popular high school show, and that permeated, the experience and what a different world was that first season. So, I was just very clear, like, we'll have none of that. I know what this is. And he was like, and yes, you do. Let's do it. Let me figure out how I can best help you do that and empower you. And that was, it was so easy for him. And that made it easier for me to be empowered, and then for me to empower others. Like it's effortless. It really is effortless to help other people.
How would you define the role of a showrunner? What do you see that as?
Woo, careful what you wish for kind of job. It really is being the showrunner is very different from being the head writer. Being the head writer is guiding the writing, but the showrunning gig is an all-encompassing one. And if I were to put it in a nutshell, I see it as not only managing this multi-million-dollar enterprise and all aspects of pre-production, production, and post, but also making it my job to inspire every single person in the writer's room and on the crew every single day. Like, it's this living organism that you want everyone to like buy into and feed, ideally. That's what you want. And I that's how I approach it. I approach it as a job where I inspire people. It makes my job easier. Going back to what Marcy Carsey told me, delegate or die. Like, you don't have to do it all. In fact, you will die trying to do it all. Be generous, dole out responsibility, teach others to do things so that you don't have to be in all of those places. And quite frankly, not being everywhere and being everything to everybody became more essential as I got married and had kids. I took home every script the first season of Living Single. Every single draft went through my little sisterly machine. Then I got married in between seasons 1 and 2. And I'm like, my husband wants some nighttime. I can't be up all night doing this. So, we had to have more focused time at work. And, other people could write outlines or polish an outline before, or a script before we tabled it as a group. I became more efficient at it. So, necessity makes you really get resourceful and creative in how you manage things. But being a showrunner is an incredibly taxing and rewarding job, but it is not one that you should undertake on your own. And it's fun for other people to learn how to do these things, and then hopefully you're, emboldening them to do it, their way when their time comes. And it's really important.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about building that team of writers that you trusted so that you didn't have to take everything home with you. Like, what were you looking for in your writers?
I love assembling a really diverse writer's room. I've never had a writer's room where I was the only in any category. It's great when you can find someone who has some experience that's close to yours, as one other voice in the room, someone who really, even if their experience isn't close to yours, someone who also knows how to listen to your voice. So someone else who can kind of, carry the torch and have that kind of voice and sensibility in the room. But then I want to have a room full of people who've come from different places and have different points of view so that the world and the work can be really layered. I think that's where the best work comes from, like really kind of passionate debate, and I like to do things that excite and scare me in equal doses, so I want people in the room who will disagree with me. When I'm ready for the disagreement to be over, I'm very clear about that too. But I like that process of listening and absorbing other perspectives. And I haven't worked on a show, and certainly haven't run a show where we're not all still in touch with each other and wanting each other's point of view and caring about each other through it all, through the decades, because I've been here a while. But because we've shared, our intimate personal details, we've laid ourselves bare. We've been incredibly vulnerable in the room, which I encourage, because again, I like ripping pages from my diary and the diary of others. It's like you got to rip those pages out and use them, and then you got to go live some more life, and then you got to get some pages from some other people, so you never run out of ideas. But I love telling those kinds of personal stories. I love when people come into the room with some anecdote, that sounds like really wild, and we're like, let's build a story around what just happened to you.
Are there any specific storylines from your life that you're comfortable sharing?
I'll just say, if you've watched any show that I've written on, and certainly if I created it, you know way more than you should about me. I think that's safe to say.
Did the cast have input on the storylines on Living Single?
They did. I mean, we listened to them. We would actually have note sessions where we would get feedback from them. And there were certainly times when they didn't want to do things, and there were certainly things that they would say that were kind of offensive or incendiary, and we would be like, okay, let's work this out. And there's some I would say maybe infamous debates or quarrels that I've had over the years, not only with that cast but with others, but with that cast in particular. That I'm going to say from my book.
Fair enough.
But it was there were some really great moments of growth. Really great moments of growth where, it's like you either win or you learn is kind of something that people say. And it's like there were times when we were all winning, and then there were times when we were challenging each other, and we grew from that. We learned and we grew. So it was good. It was a really good experience. It was sad when it was over. It was sad when it was over.
Yeah.
And it's really actually not completely over just in terms of my life energy. I'm still on a text thread with the whole cast. I mean, just this morning we were texting, and
Wow.
it's just great. Like, I don't know that everybody gets that,
Yeah.
and I have that with lots of work family members, like show after show after show. And even if I didn't run the show, like, I helped to cultivate that energy, that family vibe on every show I worked on. If it was possible, I made it a family.
Yeah.
Even if Thanksgiving was a little tense, we were a family. There are a lot of people who are building an empire. There are a lot of moguls who are TV show writers and show creators. And I really don't seek to build an empire. I just want to build a safe haven for creatives.
I think you have. Before we jump into some specific episodes, you had mentioned earlier, you didn't get to design the set for the pilot. Talk a little bit about crafting the look of the show, what their home interiors look like, the characters, costumes, makeup, hair, that kind of thing.
So much fun to be able to build all of that from the ground up. And as I said to you earlier, I got into this whole show creating thing because I wanted to create my own work environment, but also wanted to create a visual environment of the set and with the costumes and the hair that was just authentic and reflective of the world I lived in. My sorority is Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Our colors are pink and green. There's lots of pink and green on that set, and people peep that out, and they just feel that extra connection. There's lots of black art, in all of the sets, and that's all very, very intentional. Just infusing as much of us into the fabric of the show as possible has just been a trademark of mine. I feel like it's important. People see not only themselves in the characters, but they feel connected to the environment that the characters are moving in, and they see their homes, and it just gives them something else that resonates with them in a powerful way. Like, it feels like their home. So all of those details are very, very intentional.
The show is definitely a continuation of your art as activism and activism as art. Talk a little bit about striking that tone on this show, because it was a different tone than on A Different World.
Absolutely. The tone of Living Single was different from A Different World because they were also living, at a different time in their lives. They weren't in this concentrated, cauldron of consciousness that is a college environment, right? But there are definitely, issues that we all face just out in the world at large.
What you like most between the two shows of A Different World and Living Single? Let me know in the comments.
So coming up, feeling that sense of responsibility, social responsibility in my storytelling, and knowing how powerful the medium is, we definitely tackled some issues on Living Single, but we also worked very hard to not make it feel like a very special episode. Whether people received it that way or not, ultimately the goal was to have impact. The goal was to have impact. And we asked about, did the actors have input? Yes. I mean, when they looked a certain way, we worked that into the show. We did this great episode, where Kyle received some criticism because of his very, ethnocentric hairstyle. But I didn't write that character as having locks, but he did, and he was always, a stockbroker. So what is that like? And now here we are, talking very actively in our society about the Crown Act, because it's really important that we wear our hair in a style that is comfortable to us, that makes us feel beautiful and, good in our own skin and hair and, wardrobe. So it was great to do episodes like that speak very specifically to the culture, because the characters are human first. They are human first, but they're also not just kind of by happenstance Black and African American. They're decidedly Black, and living the duality of what that means to be Black in America to be a minority in these certain environments where you can't just do whatever you want at whenever you want. It's one of the reasons I also gave.
Mean, what does being Black in America mean to you?
Khadijah, her own magazine, made her an entrepreneur so that we could also show that you can do this. You can create your own space where you and others like you or others who are different from you, but just under your auspices, can thrive. And the world that we depicted on that show was also very diverse and very true to New York. And I'm really proud of that. It looked like the real New York.
Off camera, we had talked about a moment on Swing Out Sisters, which is a season 4 episode. Mm-hmm. You included a little visual touch in that episode. Can you talk about that?
Yes. We put a Soul-Aid, which is a brown skin tone Band-Aid, on a white man because we just wanted to kind of get that little piece of visual information about how, these things exist, and to also maybe have people like raise an eyebrow and think about the tone of every other Band-Aid on the planet. It's just that little culture clue that tells you not everybody has the same skin tone. Think about it without making it a message, just doing it. It's just there. This is the Band-Aid available. Yeah. And the white man can wear it the same way a Black man can put on a regular Band-Aid and have it stand out.
We talked a little bit about network notes, but what was the publicity for the show like in terms of what Warner Brothers and Fox were doing or asking you to do in terms of promotion, things like that?
Publicity for Living Single was pretty good when this show launched. But we keep talking about these not so secret secrets. When another show that had a similar premise came up against us and existed in the zeitgeist, there was definitely some diminished promotion and attention on the show. And that was very disappointing. It was very disappointing. But I do believe that the studio was always supportive, but they didn't show their support necessarily in terms of marketing and promotional dollars. Mm. And that didn't help the show succeed beyond season 5. But the fans were always there. In fact, it was the fans who brought us back for the 5th season, that shortened season, because the show wasn't originally on the schedule. And there was an uproar from the fans.
Would you actually receive fan mail? Would it make it to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Trunks of letters came in.
What kind of responses did you get?
What kind of responses did I get?
Yeah, like would people like write, I relate to this character?
Or absolutely. Like, yes. People, they love these characters. Yeah. They see themselves, they see their family members in these characters on Living Single. And I got a lot of thank yous. To this day, I get a lot of that in my DMs and on my Instagram account, which I'm barely on Instagram. But when I do post things, I get messages from total strangers just thanking me for being visionary, for creating what some consider a blueprint, and just for persevering and continuing to do work that displays us in an authentic light. I'm super proud of that. And it means something to me. I respond to them. I do, because I appreciate it. I appreciate that they appreciate the work, because I put my life's blood into it. And I've been doing it for 4 decades. Wild.
Indeed. You mentioned that the kind of the seeds for the romances were there for the beginning. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about developing those? So we'll start with Sinclair and Overton.
Yes. Sinclair and Overton as a couple came about out of my desire to just see a very unfettered, easy, simple kind of love. It's just we always see characters at odds. Not that that's not interesting, and you do need conflict for comedy, but just to see 2 people who are so clearly destined for each other and their conflict is figuring out how to get to each other. That was really the conflict. They were each holding their own conflict. But I just thought it was so sweet, and it also gave others in the show and in the audience the hope that love doesn't have to be fraught. It doesn't have to be hard. It's really kind of a choice to make it hard. Now, Max and Kyle. They are two strong-willed people who live to make things complicated. They do. They just do. My husband knows this. But their love for each other is intense and real, and that's what they thrive off of, that intensity. But they also, over the course of the seasons, found moments where they made it easy too. And by design, Overton and Sinclair were there to bring balance and perspective. So they were able to see that their love didn't have to be so hard. And again, if people take that away from the show, then bravo, because that's what was intended.
Yeah. Erica,
balance. It's always about balance and intention.
Yes.
I live for those things.
Eric Alexander has talked about the Maxine Shaw effect.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. It came about, first of all, we know that representation matters, right? There's plenty of shows, particularly shows with, featuring African-American characters that have inspired people to live better lives, to dream bigger than maybe their circumstance would dictate they should dream. And the Maxine Shaw effect is a real thing. And we did some research and discovered that 1 in 3 Black female lawyers today were inspired by Maxine Shaw. And that's pretty powerful stuff. And one of the reasons we did the research was that, Erica would go to all these places and have, like throngs of judges, run her down and tell her how inspirational she's been to them, or other people who are lawyers or working in the public sector, like Stacey Abrams, Ayanna Pressley, Marilyn Mosby, say, your character is the reason I decided to go down this path.
What does it mean to you that a character that you created has had that kind of impact?
At the risk of sounding redundant, it's just incredibly affirming that I have been doing the thing that I was purposed to do, and that there's value in me continuing to do it. I'm here to turn up on volume on the voices that have not been heard, and to provide imagery that inspires for decades.
There were some cast changes that happened in season 5. T.C. Carson left at the beginning of season 5. How did his departure impact the show?
The sigh. It's still painful. It's painful to think about. It was painful to have to be part of that dynamic. And it was unfortunate. It was just unfortunate. But it was a decision that was made born out of financial realities of the show. As I mentioned, there was a campaign to bring the show back. And when, the powers that be came to the conclusion that they would bring it back for 13 episodes, they had severely cut the budget. And so we had to make some adjustments. And we had to, get rid of some characters. But he was gracious enough to agree to do a handful of episodes that really helped us give the proper farewell to the show. When he came back in the final episode, that meant the world to me.
Yeah.
To be honest, I personally love the bond that Kyle and Maxine had on the show. To be honest with you, they were my favorite TV couple. Let me know in the comments who was your favorite TV couple and what was your favorite episode.
So Kim Fields left think it was 5.9 that she left. She was there for a majority of season 5. But
Absolutely.
talk a little bit about her leaving and what that meant.
Kim/Regine's departure was very different from having to say farewell to my brother TC in the role of Kyle, because her character got her happy ending. So even though it was accelerated because we hoped that we were going to be around for 6, 7, 8 seasons, and here we were, season 5, and a shortened one at that. We wanted to bring her storyline to its planned ending, so that felt very different. Everybody got what they wanted, and that was, I think, a good thing. She was no longer living single, so her departure completely made sense, and it was a quality creative choice.
So did you know going into the finale that it would be the series finale?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Now you're asking me a question.
Meaning?
We were hoping, against hope, that we would get a call extending that final season by some number of episodes. We actually did a little joke about it, which exists somewhere, but it did not air. Where after Khadijah leaves and closes the door, there's a call on the answer machine. It's the president of the network. That was just for us.
Oh, that's
It was
great.
just for us. We were hoping against hope because we also weren't ready to say goodbye to our family. We'd created such a beautiful thing there for everyone, top to bottom, every member of the crew. Just a wonderful experience. And people reach out to me all the time from that show. Like, they haven't had it as good since, and I think, fortunately, I kind of have, but it's hard. It's hard to kind of compare your first to any subsequent experience because it'll always be your first, it'll be like your first love. Yeah. There's always something special there that other relationships don't have. That doesn't mean that they're not also extraordinary and wonderful, but it was a really, really good thing that I cherish. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about crafting and then shooting the finale, because we did see quite a few happy endings there.
Yes. Well, I liked. I co-wrote that episode with my co-show-running partners, Pond and Fuller, Bill and Jim, and we just had a lot of fun. Hoping against hope that it wouldn't be the last episode, but pretty sure that it would. We just wanted to make sure that we, tied up all the loose ends. And I was a fan of what I used to call the bittersweet stank ending. Like, I didn't really like things that were neat and super sweet. But I did feel like that was the proper way to say farewell to this beautiful show, this beautiful cast of characters, this talented group of actors, to give everybody something that just felt satisfying, and also to bring back TC in the role of Kyle and to have it paid off in such a wonderful way with, Max discovering that her baby that she was artificially inseminated with was actually Kyle's child, was so fun for the audience, super fun for me, because as the wife of Kyle Bowser, I was carrying his first child at the time. So it was just really easy. It was just really easy and fun, and again, just felt so right, and it was personal, it was emotional. And there's some moments that people on social media have pointed out, some whispers that people had behind the scenes that we didn't notice when we put the cut together. So there's some surprises. There's some Easter eggs in there. Go back and watch.
Oh.
There's some moments there that were not planned, and so I think everyone felt pretty satisfied by the finale. The only thing unsatisfying about it was that it was the finale.
Yeah.
But we did 118 episodes, and that's like 117 more than we ever knew we were going to get. We also were the beneficiaries of a 2-season pickup after the second season, which was really lovely. It was such a vote of confidence, even though we had come up on the schedule against some juggernauts on other networks. But we did our thing. And the show was #1 in Black and Latino households for its entire run, which is also why we didn't understand how we didn't make the schedule for season 5. It was just kind of these arbitrary creative decisions get made, in the executive ranks, and you're kind of
Why do you think they didn't have a season 6?
subject to it. Yeah, but I'm glad we got to wrap it up properly, because Different World didn't get a proper finale, half and half. We had a series cliffhanger. And I've seen other shows, that not necessarily given a great send-off. So at least we did get that satisfaction. And the show had earned it. It had more than earned it. It helped build a network.
Yeah.
It helped build a network.
It's streaming now on Hulu and I think maybe Max as well. Are you hearing that it's having a second life? Are there people discovering it for the first time now?
It's like a cat. It has 9 lives, this show. I mean, there's so many, quality classic shows that have no audience now, that are not, you can't find them anywhere because no one wants to watch it. No one's interested. And I have teenagers reaching out to me. They're discovering the show. People in their 30s, 20s and 30s who watched it with their parents when they were young, and it has whole new meaning, and they're doing TikToks and Instagram posts about it. It's really phenomenal. It's really phenomenal.
With Living Single, you were the first Black woman to create, run, and produce your own primetime series in the United States. What does that mean to you?
Super special place in history that I don't usually take the time to step back and savor or acknowledge. In fact, when it happened, I wasn't even aware that it hadn't been achieved before. Had I known, I probably would have backed out. Something I probably would have said, no, wait, it hasn't been done. It can't be done. Me? But it's a source of pride, for sure, to have broken a glass ceiling. What a privilege. What a privilege from someone who did not grow up with privilege, who does not embrace privilege now. But what a privilege to be that person, to have made history with a groundbreaking show. Because there wasn't a show like it before it. It is the blueprint.
What would you say is the legacy of Living Single?
There's so many layers to the legacy of Living Single. We broke ground. We crashed glass ceilings. We set a tone. We changed the game. We blazed a trail. And I think as a show, we reached back and pulled some others along with us. I think we showed that we have value. I mean, not that that was unknown, but we kind of helped to reinforce that idea and create new opportunities for the next generation of Black creatives.
You mentioned earlier there have been some discussions about a possible reboot. Where do those currently stand?
In a quiet little room, in a box. That's where those discussions are right now.
Have there been thoughts of prequel, sequel, reboot? Have they all been discussed?
All of the above.
Mm-hmm.
All of the above. And I think when the idea is right, the timing is right, the auspices are right, you'll get more Living Single in some form.
I'll take that. All right.
Yes. I mean, it was created as a love letter to my people. And I still love them. And they still love us. So we're looking for ways to give them more.
Excellent. I wanted to mention, in 1996, you co-created the series Lush Life, which was during the run of Living Single. Mm-hmm. So were you running both shows at the same time?
I was and I wasn't running both shows at the same time. I had one hand in the Living Single pot and another hand on the wheel of Lush Life. And I wish I had done that differently. I wish I'd really tried to have a firm grasp on both at the same time. I feel like that was a situation where I let my youth and lack of feeling empowered enough to push back against what the studio wanted, which was for me to focus on the new show. The new baby needed mom's full attention. And it was sad when that show got canceled unceremoniously. I mean, the whole night got canceled. So it was a great show. I loved working with my girlfriend, Karen Parsons, whom I'd known since junior high, and her good girlfriend, Lori Petty. It was super fun. It was ahead of its time, and we had a really great staff. But it was over, after 6 episodes. But like life, you take the good with the bad. I mean, I felt like I'd failed when I got the phone call that the show was canceled and the whole night was canceled. I don't know why I made it about me. Like, I failed, and I called my mom and I'm like, I failed. And 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant with my first son. So I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll be all right. Maybe there's something good here that I can, lean into, honestly. And the opportunity to go back and be at Living Single full time was one that I welcomed.
So then in 1998, you created For Your Love.
Yes. I mean, honestly, just ripping those pages out of my diary. I mean, I figured this is going to work. It's like I chronicled my life in college on A Different World. I chronicled my life as a young single person in the city on Living Single. And, I now had, evolved into this life of coupledom. A lot of our friends, were having kids and getting married, and I was, it was a very simple pitch. In fact, I think Warren Littlefield, who ran NBC, which is where the show was sold and started, claimed at some point he bought that particular pitch after a sentence. It's like 3 couples, 3 different stages of love. It's just that simple a concept. So again, just the tearing of pages from my diary and wanting to, chronicle that next chapter. And we had such a blast on that show. And of course, I was reunited with my high school girlfriend, Holly Robinson Pete. She had a deal at Warner Brothers. So that was kind of an easy decision to make. And we both were pregnant with our first set of, she was having a set of twins and I was having my singleton, Evan. But that was a really wonderful experience too. And then D.W. Moffat, who was cast as Dean, his wife was having a baby. Our director, Barnett's wife, was having a baby. So we just had all these babies on set. We had a special trailer for them. I mean, I loved being able to, again, create that wonderful, welcoming family environment as part of the work environment. It was, again, just a blessing. Really terrific to be able to do that for the people you work with so that they can find that work-life balance, because that's really important.
Yeah.
We give a lot to our work, and it should give us something back. Other than the art. I do believe that. Put our life's blood into it.
You mentioned the show started on NBC, but it ended on the WB.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that transition?
Yes. The transition creatively wasn't a big one from NBC to the WB. But it was one of those situations where there was some politics happening between the network and the studio. And we kind of came up short because ratings-wise, we were a hit. We were actually in what they call a hammock time slot between Suddenly Susan and Mad About You, and we actually built on our lead-in. And actually, at some point, we're doing better than Mad About You. So by just the empirical data, we should have been renewed, but we were not because there was some battles going on behind the scene having to do nothing with our show. But our show was a casualty of that.
What was your experience of working with the WB?
It was terrific. It really was. It was easy, honestly. I mean, it's kind of like, in thinking about it, I'm drawing a blank because it was there was no conflict. They just loved the show and it did well, and we got another few seasons out of it. We had a good run. We had a really good run. And people are clamoring to see that show in syndication somewhere or on streaming. And we're hoping that does happen because people really love that show. We had so much fun on that show behind the scenes. We really did. It was really fun working and playing with my friends.
You had grown up watching Laverne and Shirley herself played Sherry's mom on the show. So what was it like to get to work with Cindy Williams?
So fun. I mean, like, she's hilarious, kind, generous. You also got to work with Tyne Daly. She played D.W. Moffat, Dean's mom. That was awesome because she is a force. She is a force. I've really been blessed to work with some amazing, iconic talent. We had Eartha Kitt on Living Single. I'll never forget it. Never forget it. Like, you just some people are just like touched by the hand of God. And if you get a chance to be in their atmosphere, just embrace it and just hold tight.
Yeah. You make me want to mention more guest stars.
Yeah.
Guest star on the TV show Living Single.
I know.
Single now. But there were a lot of musical stars on the show as well. Did Queen Latifah help bring people in, or was that
We all
your
did.
influence?
Yes, Latifah definitely did. She definitely got us naughty by nature for sure. But music is a big part of my life. Not that I'm particularly musical, but I do love a spontaneous song. And that's very organic to who I am. And as you know, in the end of the pilot, the ladies sing in the bathroom because that's something that I do all the time and do it with my girlfriends. I did it with my cousins, Lisa, when she lived with me. She's an opera singer. It was also the first time that Latifah actually sang instead of rapped. Like, we had to talk her into that. In episode 6, she sang. She was a little nervous. She sang I Will Survive. But then she started this whole other career where she doesn't rap, she sings. And she has a beautiful voice. She has a beautiful voice. But it's just, again, music is such a big part of our lives. It should be part of the show. It should be part of the show. And it was an organic part of the show. One of my favorite musical moments was Grant Hill singing to Rasheen and Khadijah. So sweet. So sweet. I love a sweet love song sung by a basketball star who doesn't really have much of a voice.
Who doesn't love that?
Who doesn't love that? It's just endearing. It's
Queen
just
Latifah
endearing.
did the theme song, though, didn't she?
She did.
Yeah.
She did. We recorded that theme song in the wee hours of the morning. I'll never forget that. Because people who work in the music business like to work through the night. Yes. They do, I guess. I mean, honestly, I write a lot during the wee hours, so I kind of get it. But I'm saying the music business is known for people working in the wee hours. So, you know, the tracks were laid down, and we were waiting, and she arrived, and we laid it down, and it was done in a session. So that was fun to watch. You know.
So in 2002, you were the showrunner and executive producer of Half and Half, but you didn't create the show. So how did you get involved with the program?
My agent had a client who'd written the script for Half and Half, so he created the show. And UPN was looking to make a pilot from that script and with that premise, a show from that premise. But it was written with white actors in mind, and they wanted to cast it Black or with a multi-ethnic cast. And I thought it was an interesting challenge to take something that was intended for one cultural group and kind of adapt it to another. So I kind of went out of my way, even though I had kind of the ability to rewrite it as much as I wanted to. I tried this experiment of polishing it very little. It was a very good script. It was funny. And I just kind of added a little bit of layers to the characters and try to think about what their backstories might have been, because I always need some backstory. I don't know how to move forward without knowing what came before the moment that we're meeting these characters. And my noble experiment worked out. And I liked what I proved to myself, which is that we're all human, and the human experience is universal. And that, you know, obviously when you're writing something for a specific, you know, ethnic or cultural group, you want to give it that flavor. But not every moment needs to be slathered with our differences. because ultimately we're writing about the human experience, the human condition, and hopefully our work is helping that condition evolve.
When you create backstory, what does that look like? Are you making giant bios for everyone?
Making giant bios for everyone, figuring out, like, where do they work and why do they work there? How did they get there? What was the history of these two half-sisters who didn't grow up together? And quite frankly, I filled in a lot of those gaps with my own history with my half-sister, Stephanie.
You posted on Instagram that you worked with your half-sister on the show. What was that like?
Right when I began working on and running Half and Half, my half-sister decided that she wanted a new life. She had lived in Philadelphia her entire life, and she wanted to move to California. So, like other people, she came and lived in my house for some period of time. Everyone had a little tour. They lived in my house for a while. And we had been kind of more recently in contact with each other, and we were kind of actively forming a relationship as adult sisters. Like, we both wanted it. It's like kind of time and distance and the lack of social media and, ease of contact didn't exist. So we really had to make an effort. Obviously, we had phones, but, it's hard to build a relationship that way. And so we had taken a trip together, and then we were like, we could do this. We could live in the same house. We could figure that out. And of course, I was married and had kids, or at least one, and then I was pregnant with another one. Or had had both by then. I don't know. My timeline might be a little off, but I was married with children, and she was actually a grandmother at that point because she was a young mother, and her daughter had a child young. So she was just looking to start anew, and she came out here, and she had a thriving catering business, and she met the man who became her first and only husband, and then they decided to move back to Philadelphia, where they now have a beautiful restaurant and a family. So things turned out well for her too. But it was nice to explore that. I just remember we added the device, if you will, of some flashbacks to Mona and Dee Dee's childhood. And there's a picture of my sister Stephanie and I where we're at, it's my 3rd birthday, her 6th birthday, and we're holding cakes, and there's these bikes that have banana seats that are in the back that we both got the same bike, and mine had tassels and hers didn't. And that was such a sore spot for her for years. So I'm like, let's do that story. Let's show that flashback. So again, my diary is very, very thin. I've just exploited all of it. So I have to go live more life so I can come up with more stories to tell. It also helps to mentor other show creators so their diaries can get thin while I'm building my next chapter.
Yes, and we're going to talk about all of that. Tell us a little bit about casting the show, because you'd worked with some of the actors on some previous pilots. Is that right?
I'd worked with Essence Atkins on a pilot that I wrote with my husband Kyle called The Thing About Family, which, it's another little tough one, because that show should have been picked up to series. The Thing About Family should have been picked up to series. It was like the highest tested comedy pilot that season. People in the testing groups were comparing it to The Cosby Show. And it was about, half siblings and step siblings and the thing about family. Like, it was time, but I think too many people on the inside they only had like nuclear families and didn't quite connect with it. But usually testing wins out. In that case, it did not. And that was a pilot for NBC that didn't go forward. And it was also one of those times where when the executives call you and they're like in tears that the show didn't go because they so believed in it and they just didn't win the battle in the scheduling room. But it was really great. So I met Essence, and we cast her as the youngest sister. Danny, I believe, was her name in that pilot. I also worked with Gabrielle Union in that show. So, and those two became best friends. They've been best friends since, Essence and Gabrielle. So I was looking forward to working with Essence again.
When a show doesn't get picked up, does that become fuel for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like they're either logs or propane. You know, got to keep going. Got to keep going.
Yeah.
That's my dad in me for sure. Like, yeah, you feel it, and you might feel it for a while. Like, I do still feel, you know, a little void for that pilot and a handful of others. You know, but I've sold a lot of shows, so, you know, I can process it, you know, as frustration or fuel, right? And I prefer to use it as fuel. That's the only way forward. Frustration is stagnant.
Half and Half ran on UPN. What was your experience of working with the network?
That was a really great relationship. It really was. And in fact, unfortunately, the show ended with a series cliffhanger. It was unexpected. We got caught up in what's now called the CW.
The TV show Half and Half. Let me know in the comments.
Tsunami. And there were shows that should have continued. In fact, we had been told we were getting picked up for at least 13. And then we got the call that another show got our slot. So that was hard. That was really hard to make those calls because people had expectations of coming back. Particularly because we had been told to go ahead and do this cliffhanger because y'all are coming back. But that's the business that we're in. It's unpredictable. It's volatile.
So as showrunner, is it on you to make the calls when you find out the show is canceled?
It isn't on me, but I put it on me because these are family members. These are personal relationships. This is not some cold call they should receive, especially when you know how it's going to hit. You know, one of the actors was expecting another baby, you know, so it was hard. Yeah. It was hard. And we didn't get to say goodbye to each other, you know, but we really haven't. Like I said, we're still in touch.
Yeah. We did get a little bit of a Living Single reunion on Half and Half. Kyle and Maxine came back for an episode. Tell us a little bit about working with T.C. Carson and Erica again.
That was super fun. It was super fun to write those characters again, to see the evolution of their relationship and how it hadn't really evolved now that they were parents. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It was kind of fun to see. And I just remember Warner Brothers being so gracious because we had to go to them to get permission to use those characters, even though I had created those characters. I kind of co-own them, the IP with Warner Brothers, so we needed their permission. But they were very gracious. And Erica and TC really enjoyed reprising those roles. Really did. Yeah, and it was interesting to have Essence's character, Dee Dee, admire Maxine Shaw.
She was like flabbergasted and couldn't talk around her.
Completely flabbergasted, but it was also kind of prophetic. It's like that's what the audience is doing to this day, and that was even 20 plus years ago. Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. How many people get to say that?
You mentioned that cliffhanger ending. Did you know who Mona would pick if the show were to come back?
Who do you think she would pick?
No, is it the pastry chef or the restaurateur?
When people ask me that question, I ask them. I bounce it back.
Yep.
That's who it was.
Perfect.
I have to save that in case there's a reboot.
There you go.
Because she might be with him, whoever he is.
I wanted to also mention Ellen Gittleson directed majority of the show. She directed a lot of Living Single as well.
My
Talk
girl.
a little bit about working with her.
Ellen Falcon Gittleson came in and rescued us on Living Single. We had an issue with our director starting with the 3rd episode, but it was very evident by the 4th episode of Living Single. And of course, you can imagine as a first-time show creator, there was a lot of panic. And yeah, our director just really couldn't make it to work consistently. So we had to make a change. And I had met Ellen and worked with her on A Different World season 1. And then I was actually her personal assistant on the Roseanne pilot. right after season 1 ended. So yes, I was babysitting her daughter. I was getting her dry cleaning. I was applying for a copy of the birth certificate for her children. It was the whole thing for her child, Sarah. And we were really good friends, but we, kind of had gone our separate ways. But I just thought, she gets this. Like, she's cool. She understands, like, the power of collaboration. And she was the person to call in that emergency situation. And the cast just loved her like I loved her. And it was just on and popping after that. So anything I could get her to direct, I did. And she did a great job on Half and Half. After all that she had done to, like, pick us up on Living Single and then direct so many episodes so beautifully, she was, my first choice for the pilot and then the series. And that cast loved her too.
Is there anything you want to say about the Roseanne pilot? Were you on set or involved in that in any way?
I was on set. I saw a lot. But I learned a lot, right? I learned about taking someone who is a comedian and putting them at the center of a show, and the value of finding other strong actors and characters to surround them with, to lift them up. Because you want it to work. You want it to work. You want to build a show to work. So use all of your knowledge, put it together, and then put it to work.
Let's get into talking about craft a little bit, because you are a writer, a producer, a showrunner. There's a lot of elements to your crafts. So let's just delve in there a little bit.
Okay.
We'll start with writing. What is it that you enjoy about writing?
When it's done. You're going to get that answer from a lot of writers. It can be a painful process, but I enjoy everything about it. I enjoy creating something from nothing. I don't particularly enjoy the blinking cursor or the blank page, but I do get a sense of pride from knowing that I'm going to fill those pages with something worthwhile. So I enjoy it. If I didn't enjoy it, I couldn't still do it.
I completely agree. There's nothing better than taking a vision in your head and making it as lifelike as possible. Yes, I love it.
When I don't enjoy it anymore, I'll be done.
And what is your process? Do you write longhand? Do you use note cards? Are you at the computer?
All of the above.
Yeah.
All of the above. I'm faster with longhand. But also now we can dictate things into little machines that spit it out. So I'll use whatever is, handy, quite frankly. If I have a notepad, I am very tactile, so I like to write things down a lot, but I also will use note cards to organize scenes or, to come up with character attributes, and I'll keep a little file. So I'm a little old school in keeping my my stuff organized and keeping some of those, keeping journals and index cards, using a whiteboard to break a story. But I love, a lot of this new tech that allows us to, have cards on the computer screen and move those cards around faster than, oh, we've taped it on the board, now we got to take it off. Oh, now the board is sticky. And we got to move this card over here. So, some of the technology has made the process a little faster. But I don't know that makes it easier, because the birth of every show and the birth of every script is a little arduous. It is.
You mentioned
but
that.
Worth it.
Yeah. You mentioned you like to write sometimes at night or into the wee hours of the morning. Are there any other kind of rituals or routines to your writing? Do you like to have a certain beverage or anything like that?
I do love to have my environment just right. I love to get a candle going. like for the room to feel serene. Sometimes I play music. It depends on what mood I'm in. I think a lot of people be surprised to know that, I guess from my childhood and riding around with my dad in his car, I listened to Sinatra. And that gives me a sense of peace. And sometimes I just like quiet, and so I'll write into the wee hours, or sometimes won't even start until midnight when everyone else is quiet. Actually, I was writing something the other night, and for whatever reason, someone upstairs decided that they also wanted to be up all night, kind of walking around, organizing their closet. I was like, what's going on? This is my writing time. You are supposed to be asleep. This is my me time. This is my ideating time. So yeah, I like my environment to be just so. And sometimes I'll, move around. Like I might want to be, where the wild things grow in my office here. I might sometimes also, step away from the desk and, lie on the floor and like spread pages out and really just look at it and, see where things might be a little dense or where a story might get bogged down. I just need to lay it out differently, not just kind of scrolling up and down, on a screen. I like to print out those pages and mark those pages up. That really helps me. And then I'll save those drafts. And then years later, I'll shred them. But yeah, I have a lot of paper. A lot of pens. Just kind of, I let the idea and the characters kind of guide me, and then they tell me, it's like, no, go sit on a pillow. When you're at like maybe a moment of blockage, creative blockage, just change position, change space, step away from it. Yeah, I used to drink Mountain Dew if I needed to stay up. I'm more of a yerba mate gal now.
You've been involved with the Writers Guild Showrunners Training Program. I think it just had its 18th session this year. Mm-hmm. Tell us how you got involved with the program and a little bit about it.
A guy named Jeffrey Melvoin created the Showrunner Training Program after he and another writer, I believe John Worth, wrote a booklet about showrunning. And they just wanted to have, a more personal approach to the training, to the information that was in that pamphlet. And they're from the drama world, and they engaged a lovely woman named Carol Kirshner as the program administrator, and she sought me out to help shore up the curriculum for the comedy side of the program. And over the years, it's really evolved in such a way that there's very little distinction between the two, because the differences are not so huge. It's really because you're also going from being a writer to a manager. And managing is managing, no matter what the enterprise, quite frankly. And one of the things that I think a lot of writers discover about themselves is that we're not necessarily natural managers. We're creatures that like to be isolated and antisocial when we're doing our thing. And so we basically demystify the show running process in the program, and teach best practices, to the next generation of showrunners. Now, we've had a lot of people go on to run their own shows and do it very well, but it really is incumbent upon the participants to get what they're going to get out of it. It's for me, it feels a lot like my early days as an apprentice, being able to get exposure to a variety of aspects of production over time. But this is like 6 weeks intensive course, lots of panels. We have phenomenal showrunners come in and talk about every aspect of production and post you can think of. But it's also imperative that the participants ask questions and kind of, they shape the course. And I love doing it because I love mentoring. That's always been a big part of, who I am and what I want to do in the world. But also being there, I learn something new every year. I get some little tidbit from some other showrunner who's been through some situation that I hadn't seen. So I feel very, very ready to manage pretty much any situation that might come up, because it doesn't have to be the exact same situation that they're going through, but just like there's some elements of it that feel familiar. And then that there was some resolve, and you can try to apply, what they said to your situation. And that's really what we're teaching in the program. And we have test case scenarios, so we have people, talking about how they would handle a certain situation, whether it's with cast or directors or writers, like we talk about hiring and firing of writers, managing the writer's room, managing your time, managing the budget. It really runs the gamut. It's quite thorough, and you really, you get out of it what you put into it.
You've been a mentor to so many in the industry at this point. Is there anyone that you have considered a mentor in your career?
Unfortunately not. Like, no one has really held my hand and guided me through various stages. I definitely, like, on A Different World, there was a cohort that I was part of. And people who definitely were there for me, but we were all kind of growing up and learning at the same time, so there wasn't a lot of mentorship, but I think that's the thing. It's like, I'm in some ways a motherless, like I was motherless in this business. So I know what that could have meant had I had that. So I really do seek out that dynamic with others. Of course, there's a limit to how many people I can mentor at a time and, how intimately. But I try to make myself really available. I receive calls, every day of the week from somebody in this business, usually writers or writer directors, about something. And it's not even always about the work. Sometimes it's about their personal lives and how it's impacting the work and vice versa. But every day, pretty consistently. Some people that I know really well and have known for years, and other people that I've just been exposed to, through various relationships. But it's good. I mean, it's like it gives me a sense of meaning beyond the work. Yeah.
Me and this young lady, we have so many different similarities when it comes to writing. I love being up late, like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I consider that my me time, just like her. And if you feel deep in your bones that you want to be a writer, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, but you just don't know how to make it happen, look in the description box below. Consider checking out my course, and you can also pick up my book, will be linked down there as well.
So in the 2000s and 2010s, you were a consulting producer on several shows, Lipstick Jungle, Happily Divorced, The Exes, and Blackish.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the role of a consulting producer, and specifically on Blackish, let's talk about?
Well, the role of a consulting producer is to do everything within your skill set. So for me, everything within the showrunner skill set, but for less money. Mm-hmm. And it's really about the opportunity to help others and tell some different stories and challenge yourself in different ways. And I landed on Blackish because I had mentored Kenya in the showrunner training program the year before, when he was actually working on the concept for Blackish. And there were a whole lot of issues that he came to me about during that process of even selling it. So before it was sold, I was having conversations with him, and then I read, the early pilot and gave some notes and things like that. So my role on that show was really like his consigliere. I think he would agree that that was kind of my role, kind of behind the scenes, and then more openly and officially when I was on the show. And even then when I was on the show, sometimes I'd be like, psst, psst, how about this? Nope, we're going the wrong way. Maybe we should do it this way. And I guess one example, there were a couple, but one really good example of that was when we decided we were going to take this bold step and do the episode called Hope, which is really about having the talk that certainly I was very exhausted having with my sons about being Black men in America and some of the inherent dangers of that. And we decided to do this really, really powerful episode as a result of, yet another evening when I knew I was going to have to go home and have the talk with my 2 Black teenage sons. And Kenya bought me a bottle of alcohol. We shared that in the room, and then we said, we have to speak to this. And quite frankly, because it is a very heavy topic, most of the writers were very nervous about us doing it. And even after we had painstakingly broken like every beat of that episode in a large group, it was like all hands on deck, and had lots of great passionate, layered discussion about what we should and shouldn't do in this episode. And then we, Kenya wrote the draft, and then we had an internal table read with just the writers. I mean, like, you could hear a rat piss on cotton. People were so quiet and so afraid of it. But having come up the way I came up, from a different world, living single and now Blackish, I was not afraid. So I really was, again, in the role of consigliere, encouraging him to boldly move forward with that episode. And I think it was, a real milestone, episode for the show. And I think it put it on the map in a way that it would not have otherwise been had we not decided to, go boldly where others were not going at this time in television. And then the flip side of that is this really funny story where, because it was this important episode and weighty episode, a lot of people were nervous about it, as we went through the process. And so there were a lot of eyeballs on it. And when we turned it into the network, like 100 people watched, the initial rough cut. And people really enjoyed it. But it was a little long. And Kenya came to me and he said, "Can you take a look?" And I'm like, "Yeah, this is what I do. I'm made for this." So I go into the edit bay and I look at it and I find the 2 minutes or whatever it was. But I also find a scene where Dre Johnson, the lead character, is walking toward camera in the hallway of his home, and a crew member scampers across the stage. 150 people had seen several cuts of this, and no one noticed the prop master walking in the scene. So it's good to have that attention to detail.
Needed your eyes on it for sure.
It definitely did. It definitely did. I mean, we would have all been mortified had we been watching that on television. This is going to put the show in another conversation in America. Oops. There's the prop master scampering across the foyer. So,
were you pleased with how the final episode came out?
I was absolutely pleased with the final episode. I was pleased with that whole show. I think it's a wonderful show. I love that family. I love that cast. I love the family we had behind the scenes. I love, some of the holiday traditions I brought in, we did Secret Santa. I mean, it was great. And even after leaving the show, after 2 seasons where I felt like my time there had run its course, I'm still really close friends with most of the people. We have our Blackish family. And I would go back for certain, kind of monumental table reads. I was there for the final table read. I was there at the 100th party. Those cast and writers and crew, their family. It was a really good vibe. It was great to watch those kids grow up. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about another show that you were showrunner on, this time Dear White People. So you were showrunner for the first 3 seasons, stayed on as executive producer for season 4. How did you get involved with that series?
I got involved with Dear White People because the person that was slated to run the show had some kind of conflict by the time the show got picked up. And so they were in search of a new showrunner. And before they shot the pilot, plus 9 episodes. And it was for Netflix, so they were going to make 10. It was kind of a straight-to-series situation. And I had a breakfast meeting with Justin Simeon, who told me, you were my first choice, but you weren't available. You were on Blackish. I was like, well, look at serendipity. Here we are. And we had a really wonderful conversation about some of the ideas that he had laid out in the Bible and some of the things that he wanted to do. And me being me, little Yellow Truth, now grown Yellow Truth, asked him some hard questions about some of the things he wanted to do. And I think the details of which are not that important, but, there was a tonal shift that he wanted to make at some point in this season. And the specifics of which he wasn't really sure he wanted to do, and I could tell he wasn't sure. And I was like, you shouldn't do it that way. We can find another way. We can find another way to give you what you're looking for. And in fact, that became episode 5, where Reggie had a gun pulled on him at a campus party. But he had something else in mind. And I was bold enough in that first meeting to say, I don't think you should do what you're planning to do, and trust that we can do something else. And I thought, he might not want me to come in and work with him, because I was bold enough to say that what he had on paper wasn't what I thought was the best choice, the best move. But we worked together incredibly well. He was really open to collaborating, and I think we hired a terrific staff, and I think that cast, so young, so talented, just a group of stars, just amazing. And they did powerful work. And that episode was, directed by Barry Jenkins, and it was daring, even more daring than I think some of the other shows I'd done that had dealt with serious plots. So much so that we had to shut down production for about an hour and a half after shooting the scene where Reggie gets that gun pulled on him. We were all impacted by it because it was just so real. It was just so real and so terrifying. But we felt like a responsibility to depict that reality. We did our research. We certainly were asked questions like, do campus cops have guns? Yes. We wouldn't have put it in front of you if it was fictitious. It always has to be true. For me, it has to be true. It could happen. It may not seem like it happens easily, whatever that, moment is or that twist, but it has to be true. And it was so real. The actor who played Reggie, Marquis Richardson, he got a comfort dog. He got a support animal after that, because it was very, very real. And we were just broken down, sobbing uncontrollably, and just feeling it for, our fellow man. How unfortunate that you could just be living your best life, just being Black and free, and that being in and of itself an act of revolution. And you're now at a party with a gun in your face, being asked for your ID, being asked for your papers. Whew.
Yeah.
It was intense. It was intense. And that was a moment I remember in the room when someone suggested it, and I hate that I can't remember who suggested it, because I know I don't like when I was in the room and someone would say, someone said, and I was always someone, but I don't genuinely remember at the moment. But when someone suggested that he be asked for his ID, and it's just my blood ran cold, like he was being asked for his papers, like he was a slave. And I'm like, we can't do that. And then I was just like, no, this is that moment where it scares and excites me in equal doses. We have to do it. We have to do it. And that would happen. That absolutely would happen. Because that cop doesn't believe that that Black man should be here. How dare he be here in this ivory tower, in this, bastion of higher education? How dare he be there being his free Black self? But you can be there, and then you can not be there just that fast. That's the reality that we live with. And unfortunately, that show, as wonderful as it was, its ratings were okay, but they went up 300% after the tragic death of George Floyd in the summer of 2020. It took that for people on their own to go find the show and looking for answers. They're not going to find all the answers there. But, it tells you something about our society, for sure. It tells you the power of the medium. It tells you that people look to the medium for information, for answers, for understanding. So I'm really fortunate to be in a position to provide some modicum of understanding for those who don't live the same existence that I live with my family and my friends.
What was your experience of working with Netflix? Were they very involved on the creative side?
They were, and we had some great, smart, invested executives, and Kristen Zollner and Tara Duncan, who now has established the Onyx Collective. So I'm fortunate enough to work again with Tara. In fact, she was the person who made the call and said, Yvette, I want you to come run this show. But we'll get to that. But they were great. They were great. And it was very freeing. It was very freeing. That was my first streaming experience. So it was interesting for me kind of boldly going into, creative space where we were really shooting a movie. And Justin, who's a really brilliant director, had a very clear vision for this thing and gave it a beautiful, beautiful look. And also I had to, write nude scenes. And that was very freeing because, there's only so far you can go in network television. So, and we did some wonderful, wild, and unexpected moments. There's a scene, I think it might have been the second episode of season 1, where Lionel, who has a crush on Troy, is thinking about Troy in a sexual way while getting a haircut, and it's really beautiful. It's really artfully done. Like, I hadn't been a part of something that was like, this is art. This isn't just craft. This is art. This is beautiful and emotional. And even though I'm not a gay man, I felt everything he was feeling, and that's successful art. I love it. I loved it.
Having started out in multicam shows, this was a single cam show.
Mm-hmm.
So how does running a multicam show differ from running a single cam show, or does it?
It's all management. It's all being responsible, being in charge, bearing the weight of the production. But yes, there are aspects of it, just a physical production, that differ. But Blackish was also a single camera show. What you don't get are notes, day one through the end of production. People sign off on the script and that's what we're shooting. You do change lines here and there, but it's not that same kind of razzmatazz on the spot. Like, let's punch this up, gang. Let's have a little huddle. Let's see if we can refresh this joke on the fly for the audience. Let's see if this works. But it's rewarding in different ways. But managing a show is managing a show, so it's not that different. You plan it different, and the way the week unfolds is different. But that's really it.
You wrote a couple episodes of the show. You co-wrote Volume 2, Chapter 9, which is the episode where Sam goes home after her father passes away. Why did you want to write that episode in particular?
I pitched that episode and wrote it because I wanted to pay homage to my mother, who passed away the first week I worked on Blackish. So for some period of time, I'd been trying to find a way to process my grief other than eating. I carried that weight around for a long time. And also I had hired my dear friend Nashin Dubai, who had lost her husband and writing partner some years earlier. And he had written this beautiful letter. And so in the process of sharing all of our stories about loved ones and lost ones, she really felt like she wanted to share part of that letter. And that's why we decided to co-write it, because that was so personal. How could we not? But we also felt like we wanted to process our grief together in the writing process. Like, neither one of us really wanted to sit with it alone, So when you talk about process and like,
When it comes to TV, writers put a little bit of themselves into a TV show. Let me know in the comments, what part of you would you love to see in TV?
setting the mood and what you do. Like, there's some times when things are just that heavy and that deep and that personal that you don't necessarily want to, you sit alone with it. You want to go through it, because we do get tremendous catharsis and release from the work and the art that we put out into the world. But sometimes you don't want to be isolated with it. So we decided to do it together, and it was wonderful. It was really wonderful. It's the first time we had written together. So we split 2 episodes. That's how we did that.
That episode really highlights the relationships between Sam and Joelle and Coco. And Sam and Coco weren't even particularly close at that point in time, but
Right.
she insists on coming.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the female friendships on
Yes,
the show?
I love that. Again, my brand is, sisterhood, enviable female friendships, and we had a lot of discussion about that because Justin wasn't particularly in favor of Coco also going, and I was adamant about it. I just felt like there wasn't going to be a lot of conflict for Sam to just go with her bestie and co-signer in life, Joelle. Not that it wouldn't be interesting, but I really felt like I wanted that girls' trip element of it. And also, one of the things that we came up with in the room, because we were, fleshing out the series based on the film, was that at one point, Coco and Sam were close. And in season 1, we did an episode where we saw that they were close and we saw where the riff began. So it was nice to kind of play that out and to remind those girls of what they once meant to each other. So it was great to have all 3 of them together.
What do you think the legacy of Dear White People is?
A legacy of depicting the world as it is, warts and all. Warts and all. Really taking a lot of systems and a lot of attitudes to task. Yeah. And we had a great time doing it.
So let's move on to the next show that you were showrunner on. You were showrunner in the first season of Run the World for
Yes.
Stars, which shot in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what pandemic production was like at that time, what that overall experience was like?
Yes. Run the World is a beautiful show that I started to develop with the show creator in 2018. We sold it in January of 2019. Got picked up to pilot in August of that year. And we shot the pilot in December of 2019. And in the first weeks of 2020, we turned in our pilot and got picked up to series. We were so excited. This is going to be fun. We're going to make a show in New York. It's going to be sexy. It's going to be amazing. Can't wait. And 3 weeks into the writer's room, we all got sent home into a land of Zoom and trying to figure out how to be creative and collaborative and collegial from our disparate corners of the world, while also feeling the pressure of this great unknown that was the pandemic. So that created a lot of challenges, just personally and creatively, keeping people engaged. There were some writers who went home to just their pets. There were no people with them. And so there were certain issues to be managed that were new issues for me. I understand the job. And part of it is being like a psychologist, or a priest or a parent. You're all of those things when you're a showrunner. But now I'm a showrunner in a new the pandemic, right? And so it starts to get real personal because now you're inside people's rooms, you're inside their homes, you're in their bedrooms, you're in whatever room they choose to be in while they're going through, this global phenomenon. So the writing took longer, but we got there. And then we finally got the green light. New York was seeming like it was opening up. We got the green light to go into production on the subsequent 7 episodes. And then there were just all of these provisions that had to be dealt with. We had to have conversations with each of the cast members that were going to be, on set and on location in New York with the COVID team and walk everyone through that process. We also, had to get everyone on board for the testing protocols, which wasn't as easy as you think, because, as you know, everyone had a different philosophy about, COVID in general. So it was managing a lot of new things. And then when we got there, after thinking we'd, leapt over all these preparation hurdles, being on set, on location with a crew of over 150 people, most of whom had gone into their homes at the height of the pandemic and not come outside. They were terrified. People were scared, and rightfully so. But they had to come out because they had to feed their families. So it was managing something like, there was nothing like anything I had managed before. And we managed to do it professionally and with grace and with consideration for everyone's concerns. And we managed to get through it without shutting down for COVID. And when I got on the plane, I breathed a sigh of relief that we had accomplished this monumental thing. Because there were a lot of people who also were acting outside of themselves, out of fear, and on any given day. It was unrelenting. The management of it, the problem solving, the dousing out of fires, most of which were emotional for people. And when I landed in LA, I wept. And when I got home to my family, I was like, I'm so proud of how we managed that. I never thought that that would be the feather I put in my cap after, producing this beautiful, funny show. It's like, I managed the pandemic. Yeah. Because it was also a surge. As we started out in September and we ended in the second to last week of December. So there was a surge. So it was interesting because emotionally, I think it was a lot like going into a war zone. And there's just constant triage and lots of audibles that you have to call. We can't shoot this way. We can't shoot this in this location. We can't use this many people. We're going to have to, add some people in post, which also just sounded bananas. But we were figuring out a lot of it as we went. But it was also tremendously gratifying because I figured it out. Along with my amazing line producer, Caroline. It was great. It tested what we were made of. Yeah. But we came out the other side pretty whole.
And then it got a second season.
So how can you not feel accomplished when you not only survive something that new and that unknown, but you thrive in it? So, growth.
You had mentioned Onyx Collective, and you got a chance to work with them. Tell us a little bit about working with them on Unprisoned.
I love the Onyx Collective. I love what it's about. I love that it's, for us, by us. It's not a network that's trying to build its programming and its reputation on the backs of minorities and then discard us. It has a very clear agenda that it's true to. And I'm super excited to be part of that. I'm hoping that we're going to do a second season of Unprisoned, and, I'd like to do another project with them. I love Tara Duncan. I think she is one of the smartest executives that I've worked with in the last almost 40 years. And been around a while, guys. And I've seen a lot. And I've worked with a lot of really good executives. But she's also one of those rare executives who's operating from a real passion for the material and the people who create the content, and not operating from a place of fear. A lot of decisions get made in this town out of fear. Whether it's cancellation or a quick pickup of something that isn't quite fully baked, a lot of decisions do get made out of fear. And she doesn't operate from that place, which is very reassuring and calming for me as a creative, leading a show. So I'm really excited about what Onyx is establishing and what they can be in the future.
So Imprisoned also shot during the pandemic, but 2022 pandemic. Is that correct? Is that when it shot?
Yeah, so we still had testing protocols and we wore masks, but things were much more relaxed.
Yeah.
We did have a couple people get sent home, because of false tests in the middle of a day. So it does, it certainly presents some new challenges for modern day production, but it's worth it to keep everybody safe, because you certainly wouldn't want, to not have tested people or to not have followed the protocols and for someone to fall ill.
And the
Gravely
writer's
so.
room was over Zoom, is that correct?
The writer's room was over Zoom.
Tell us
This
what a
is the new
Zoom-
day.
Yeah, what is that like compared to an in-the-room writer's room?
The Zoom room can be very efficient and very productive and very creative. I personally don't love it because I love those in-between moments. The moment in the hallway, that you have with someone else, as opposed to, boop, I'm on screen, boop, I'm out of here. I do think that people's attention is maybe a little more split in this new Zoom universe as well. But we've made the best of it. And I just miss the camaraderie of the room and that process. It's a collaborative medium. Television's a collaborative medium. I want to collaborate in person with people and feel connected to them. Because also sometimes like tone and intention get a little lost. If you're sitting on a Zoom and someone's talking to you and they just like shift in their chair and seem to lean in, it might be read as or felt as aggression. And I've seen that happen. And then suddenly I'm mediating between two people who meant nothing ill to each other but misinterpreted a movement in a Zoom because you're just a big head and you're leaning in and you weren't even that passionate about the point you were making, but suddenly it's misinterpreted, and people do tend to talk over each other a little bit more in the Zoom, so that's just becomes another layer of micromanagement that's maybe a little exhausting at times. Also, you don't have that big board that we're all looking at. We're not, we're looking at something, plus we're looking at each other as opposed to just looking at the board. It's kind of disorienting at times, and we purposefully shorten the time that we spend there because you just get that Zoom exhaustion and drainage from looking at a screen for too long, So like I said, it can be more efficient, but it's also a more detached process, and I like those moments in between, because sometimes like a really good idea can come from pouring a cup of coffee next to somebody, and you're just like running it by some idea by them, maybe an idea that you don't really want to say in the room, you want to get someone else to back you up or co-sign. So I miss those moments, and then having all the writers on set when they can be there. That's something that we don't have now because we have to have limited numbers of people. Hopefully that's changing, because I think it's important for the development of writers, into producers. They actually get that hands-on experience, because you can't really learn it from a distance and watching someone else do it or seeing the results of their work. You need to be at the scene of the fire and witness how the firefighters put it out so that you can figure out how to turn on that hydrant, how to hold that hose so you don't get blown backwards. So I think it's really important for the next generation of writers, showrunners, to get that hands-on experience throughout the entire process, from the page to the stage to post, because that's where the show really gets finished, polished, and post.
In 2023, there are still now a lot of Zoom writers' rooms. We're hearing that pitches often happen through Zoom now. Do you think a lot of these things are likely to persist that way, or do you think they'll return to pre-pandemic times?
I think the Zoom pitch is here to stay. And I think the Zoom rooms are here to stay. And one advantage of the Zoom room is that you can hire someone who's incredibly talented, who's perfect for your staff, who lives in Timbuktu or wherever, so that's great. And people just work around, the time differences. But I think that's one advantage. But I think it's minimal. I mean, ideally, I would have a hybrid room. If you're here in town, let's all sit down. Didn't mean to rhyme, but it just does. And, if other people want to come in and spend some time, then they can. But I think a hybrid room is probably the next best thing. And I'd like to try that out in season 2. of Unprisoned and beyond. I think pitches, unless you demand they be in person, are going to be forever on Zoom, for sure, because it's just very efficient in terms of the time the network and studio executives have. You know, they're just able to go from one pitch to the next. But I do, once again, being an old head, I miss that, like, in-person, small talk, you know, where you might even, like, Stephen Cannell, just perch yourself on the arm of the sofa and be like, I'm this cool guy, and I've got this pitch for you. He demonstrated that once at the showrunner training program. I was like, he's so cool. He's so smart. I get it. I totally get it. I'm buying whatever you're selling because you're so cool and so confident. I wish I had that. I don't. I've sold many pitches, but I never perched on the arm of anybody's couch at HBO or anywhere else and sold something. But he's done it, and I believe him. I believe whatever he says.
What do you do to prep for a pitch?
So much work to prep for a pitch. Build a world. Build characters. Build a Bible. Where do I see this show going? It's a lot of prep, and then, so it's taking...
What this young lady has exposed bits and pieces of her life on many different TV shows. Let me know in the comments, how well do you think she would do in front of the camera? Me personally, I think she should take the chance. I really do.
very dense material and cutting it down to what now, also because of Zoom fatigue, needs to be for a half hour. Like, they want to hear your pitch in like 20 minutes. And someone was telling me it's like 7 to 13 minutes. I'm like, why are the rules changing? You still need to know certain information. And very few people are selling their pitches in the room in Zoom. So it's not like, okay, the pitching is more brief, and so that helps people discern whether or not the idea works for them faster. It doesn't. There's just certain things that you need to know. So, you know, I've kind of put my foot down a little bit, like, it takes the time that it takes. You know, I'm going to be respectful of people's time, but for me, I think a pitch should be scheduled for an hour, and it should be 25 to 30 minutes of the creators pitching it, and then questions and answers. You know, I think that pitching something in 7 to 13 minutes, because we're now in the Zoom world, is absurd. I don't write commercials. That's like asking me to write a commercial. You know, when I've done all of this work building out a world, and now it's about speed pitching, I think that's not great for the industry. I don't think it's good for the business, because I think you're going to miss a lot of really good ideas. And also maybe get a little fooled by the razzle dazzle. It's like the person who can do the elevator pitch, but all they know about it is what they tell you in the elevator. That will not get you a series, my friend.
So now we just have a few summing up questions, and we've been talking a little bit about this already, but how are some other ways that television has changed since you first started in the industry?
There's a lot more of it.
Yes.
Which is a beautiful thing. More stories, more opportunities, more pathways to success.
Back in the 80s and 90s or now? Let me know in the comments.
More diverse stories. I think that's the way it's changed. I do think that there might be a bit of a contraction of the business because it expanded very wide very quickly, and that usually warrants some correction. But I think that we're going to continue to have a lot of opportunities and hear from a lot of new voices, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
So we at the Television Academy have been conducting these oral history interviews for over 25 years now. What do you think? Yay! Thank you. What do you think is the value of preserving these kinds of behind-the-scenes stories from within the industry?
I think it's invaluable. Just knowing how many people have seen me do various things and kind of climb the ladder and been inspired, I think it's a wonderful thing to be part of. I'm honored to be here, and also really enjoyed watching other people's, pieces and telling their story. I really have. So I think that's where I'll get some more advice to fill my advice cup with.
What advice would you give to an aspiring writer?
Do the work. A lot of people say they want to write, and they have written nothing. Or they've written one thing, and they've been peddling that one thing for like 10 years. Writers write, and writing is rewriting. So do the work. If you want it, that's how you get it.
What advice would you give to an aspiring showrunner?
Careful what you wish for. I think I said that earlier, but I do mean it. It's a wonderful, wonderful job, but it is taxing. And I enjoy it. I enjoy it because I've found ways to make it easier, to delegate or die. Mm-hmm. But also I've continued to add tools to my tool belt over the years and just, fortify the way I go about doing it. So I think I make it look easy because I've found ways to make it easier. But it's a big job. It's a big job. So find some collaborators, find some partners.
Earlier this year, you were the recipient of the Writers Guild Patty Chayefsky Laurel Award. What did that mean to you?
It was the affirmation I didn't even know I needed. It's that simple.
You gave a beautiful speech.
Thank you.
And I know a lot of the Living Single cast members were there supporting you as well.
Mm-hmm. And Latifah called me the day before. We talked for 90 minutes. She was working on the equalizer. So they were all there, the other 5, and she was there in spirit for sure. Yeah. I mean, that was special because a lot of people have received that honor and their cast members didn't show up like that. And there were over 100 writers who showed up because of little old me. Yeah. Whew, yeah.
And it's an award
it's pretty
that comes
amazing
from your peers, from fellow writers.
Absolutely. It's powerfully affirming. I mean, it's just that simple. Like I said, it's the acknowledgement I didn't know I needed because I don't really work for that. Someone asked me in a post-production session if I ever got an Emmy. And I said, no, but I got to shift the culture. Yeah. And that's what's meaningful to me.
What would you say is your proudest career achievement?
I mean, that's kind of like asking me to pick my favorite kid. I would say it's shifting the culture and continuing to do so. I mean, it's been almost 40 years. Not many people can say that. Like, I'm still here. Survivor.
And making an impact.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very reluctant to think about my work and frame it as important with a capital I, but I'm incredibly proud of the impact that it's had over the decades. How can I not be? Like, I think it's important to remain humble, but I'm definitely proud of that. With all due humility.
Absolutely. Have you had any career regrets?
Oh, they know who they are. They know who they are.
The perfect answer. And then where do you see yourself 10 years from now?
On a beach somewhere. Whether it's on earth or in heaven. On a beach somewhere. Probably writing in my journal.
I cannot thank you enough for spending the time with us today, Yvette. It has been such an honor and a pleasure to get to chat with you.
Thank you. Thanks for making it so easy.
Oh, my pleasure.
Because I don't love to be on camera. I'm behind the scenes kind of gal.
You did amazing.
And now you know why.
No, honestly, I think everything you shared is going to be so beautiful. Your story itself is so impactful. And I know you were reluctant to sit here and share it with us, but it's going to mean so much to so many people for future generations to be able to see everything that you've accomplished, the way that you've accomplished it, and the impact that you're going to make still for decades and generations to come.
Thank you.
So thank you
I've
so
tried
much.
to do it with dignity and grace.
Absolutely.
That's all I know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Types of interviews. But when it comes to this particular interview compared to all the rest, so far, they didn't ask her that one question that they've asked all the others. So I want you to answer that question in the comments. What do you think her legacy is? What do you think she wants the world to best remember her for? You have watched Yvette Bowser interview, part 4 of 4.